I moved to Lisbon to forget them. I moved to start over. My ex-wife Camilla married her new Fguy exactly 3 weeks after our divorce papers were stamped. She called him a visionary. She called him a wealthy venture capitalist. My own son Jamal looked me in the eye and told me that he would be the best man at their wedding because he finally wanted a father figure who understood how to make real money. They thought I was finished. They thought I was just an old, retired electrician with nothing left but a small pension and a broken heart. They were wrong. During their wedding reception, a single guest stood up and said one sentence that made Camilla scream in a way I will never forget. And then, at 2 in the morning, my phone rang. But before I tell you how sweet that revenge tasted, I need to take you back to the moment everything fell apart. My name is Bernard King. I am 74 years old, and for 40 years, I worked as a master electrician. I wired skyscrapers, hospitals, and the very courthouse where my life was just dismantled. If you have ever felt like you gave everything to people who only saw you as a bank account, please hit the like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments which city you were listening from. I read every single one. The asphalt of the courthouse parking lot was radiating heat that afternoon, but I felt cold, freezing cold. I was holding the keys to the obsidian black Mercedes S-Class, a car I had paid for with overtime shifts and blistered hands. It was the one luxury I had allowed myself in a lifetime of saving. Before I could even unlock the door, a manicured hand with long, crimson fake nails snatched the key fob right out of my grip. It was Camilla. At 65, she was still a striking woman, but the ugliness of her greed had started to seep through her foundation. She dangled the keys in front of my face like she was teasing a dog. "Don't be pathetic, Bernard," she sneered, her voice loud enough for the passing lawyers to hear. "You know the judge awarded the car to me. It goes with the house. And the 60% of the savings. You don't need a luxury sedan to drive to the library, or wherever it is you old men go to waste time." I stood there, my empty hands still hovering in the air. It wasn't about the car. It was about the disrespect. "Camilla," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I maintained that engine. I know every bolt in that chassis. You don't even know what kind of fuel it takes." She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "That is what money is for, Bernard. That is what you never understood. You love getting your hands dirty. You love fixing things. That is why you are small. Preston doesn't fix cars. He buys the dealership. That is the difference between a laborer and a king." Preston. The name tasted like bile. The man she had been seeing for 6 months behind my back. The man she was now leaving me for. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to snatch the keys back. I am a logical man. I deal in circuits and currents. If you overload a circuit, it blows. Camilla was overloading me, but I refused to blow. Not here, not in public. "Enjoy the ride, Camilla," I said. "Just remember to change the oil." She rolled her eyes and reached into her designer purse. She pulled out a small plastic card and flicked it at my chest. It bounced off my tie and landed in a puddle of oil on the pavement. "I didn't want you to be stranded," she said with a smirk. "I bought you a bus pass. It has $20 on it. That should get you to whatever cheap motel you are staying at. Consider it a parting gift." I looked down at the bus pass floating in the oil. It was the ultimate insult. After 40 years of marriage, after raising a child, after paying for her surgeries and her vacations and her jewelry, I was worth a $20 bus card. I bent down to pick it up. My knees popped, a reminder of my age. As I straightened up, wiping the oil off the card with a handkerchief, a shadow fell over me. It was Jamal, my son, my 35-year-old boy. He was wearing a suit that was too tight, trying to look like the Wall Street tycoons he saw in movies. He was carrying a box of Camilla's personal items from the car trunk to transfer them to her new life. "Jamal," I said, stepping forward, "I am glad you are here. Maybe we can grab dinner later. I need to figure out my next move." Jamal didn't look at me. He looked at his polished shoes. He shifted the box in his hands, avoiding my eyes. "I can't, Dad," he mumbled. "Preston is taking us to that new steakhouse downtown, the one where steaks cost $300. We are celebrating." "Celebrating?" I asked, feeling a crack in my composure. "Celebrating the end of your parents' marriage?" Jamal finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes broke me more than the divorce decree. It was pity, mixed with contempt. Look, Dad, let's be real, Jamal said, his voice gaining a sudden, arrogant confidence. You had a good run, you worked hard, but the world has changed. You can't save your way to wealth anymore. Preston is going to teach me about leverage, about crypto, about venture capital. He paused, glancing at his mother who was already sitting in the driver's seat of my Mercedes, revving the engine impatiently. You are a good guy, Dad, Jamal continued, twisting the knife. But you are small time. Preston is a wealthy man, a powerful man. He can open doors for me that you couldn't even unlock. You should be happy for Mom. She finally got the upgrade she deserves. Upgrade. My son called another man an upgrade, to the father who taught him how to throw a baseball, who sat up with him when he had fevers, who paid for the college degree he was currently not using. I looked at Jamal. I saw the weakness in his chin, the hunger for easy money in his eyes. I realized then that I hadn't just lost a wife. I had lost a son long ago. I just hadn't noticed, because I was too busy working to pay for the things they wanted. The horn honked. "Jamal, let's go," Camilla yelled from the car. "Don't waste your breath. He doesn't understand high finance. He thinks rich means having a savings account." Jamal gave me a quick, dismissive nod. "Take care of yourself, Dad. Don't do anything crazy. Maybe get a hobby." He turned his back on me. He walked to the Mercedes, opened the passenger door, and got in. He didn't look back, not once. I watched as the car peeled out of the parking lot, leaving a trail of exhaust fumes. I stood there, alone, clutching the oily bus pass in one hand and my small suitcase in the other. Most men would have cried. Most men would have gone to a bar and drank themselves into a stupor. But I am not most men. I am a master electrician. When a system is corrupted, you don't mourn it. You disconnect it. You isolate the fault. And then you build a new circuit. I walked to the bus stop bench and sat down. The metal was hot against my back. I took out my phone. My hands were steady. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm of absolute finality. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for my broker, Mr. Henderson. He answered on the second ring. "Bernard, everything go okay in court?" "Sell it," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Sell what, Bernard? The stocks?" "Everything," I said. "The remaining portfolio, the bonds, the antique collection in storage, the land in Georgia. Everything that isn't cash, turn it into cash. Today." There was a silence on the line. "Bernard, that is a significant liquidation. Are you sure? The market is a bit volatile right now. You might lose a few percentage points." "I don't care," I said, watching a city bus rumble toward me, spewing black smoke. "Liquidate it all. And wire the funds to the international account we set up last month." "The international account? Bernard, are you going somewhere?" "Yes," I said, as the bus screeched to a halt in front of me. The doors hissed open, revealing a tired driver who looked like he hated his life. I stepped up, tapping the oily card Camilla had thrown at me against the reader. It beeped. "Approved. I am going to Portugal, Mr. Henderson," I said, stepping to the back of the bus. "When?" he asked. "Tonight," I replied. I hung up the phone and looked out the dirty window. The city of Chicago, the city I had helped build with my own hands, slid past me. My ex-wife thought she had stripped me bare. My son thought I was a failure. They thought they had taken everything, but they didn't know about the patent. They didn't know about the German energy contract, and they certainly didn't know that by taking the house and the car, they had just anchored themselves to a sinking ship, while I was cutting the rope to float away. Let them have the Mercedes. Let them have the house. I was about to find out just how much leverage Preston really had. I closed my eyes and let the vibration of the bus engine soothe me. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of their education, and tuition was going to be very, very expensive. 6 months. That is how long it takes to learn that silence is not empty, but full of answers. In Chicago, my life had been a constant cacophony of demands. Camilla wanting a new sunroom, Jamal needing bail money for a failed business venture, Tiffany complaining that our family dinners weren't Instagrammable enough. But here in Lisbon, on the terrace of an apartment that overlooks the Tagus River, the only sound was the distant chime of a tram and the seagulls circling the red tile roofs. I took a sip of my espresso. It was strong, dark, and simple, just the way I like it. My neighbors here think I am just a retired pensioner living on Social Security. They see an old man in a linen shirt and comfortable sandals, walking to the market to buy fresh sardines. They treat me with a kindness I hadn't felt in decades. Bom dia, Senor Bernard, the baker says every morning. They don't know that the man buying a €2 loaf of bread holds the primary patent for the KV400 industrial circuit breaker. They don't know that every time a factory in Berlin powers up its assembly line, or a hospital in Tokyo switches to emergency generators, a fraction of a cent is deposited into an account that Camilla never knew existed. She never asked about my work. To her, I was just a blue-collar worker with dirt under his fingernails. She didn't understand that electricity is a language, and I was one of the few people who knew how to write poetry in it. I had protected that patent, not out of greed, but out of necessity. It was my safety net, and now it was my freedom. I placed my cup on the saucer, enjoying the warmth of the ceramic. I was finally breathing. My blood pressure was down. The phantom pains in my back were gone. I was ready to close the book on my past life completely. Then, my phone buzzed on the mosaic table. It was a jarring, mechanical sound that seemed to slice through the Portuguese sunlight. I looked at the screen. The name flashing there was Jamal. My thumb hovered over the decline button. I had spoken to him only once since the incident in the parking lot. A brief text message to confirm I had landed safely. He hadn't replied. Why call now? Why disturb the first real peace I had known in 40 years? I am a logical man. Logic dictates that you gather data before you make a decision. So, against my better judgment, I answered. Hello, Jamal, I said. My voice sounded deeper, calmer than he probably remembered. Dad? Is that you? The connection was clear, but his voice sounded tinny, rushed. There was no warmth in it. No, hello, how are you? No happy birthday, even though I had turned 75 last week. Yes, Jamal, it is me. Is everything all right? Yeah, everything is great. Fantastic, actually, he said, but he was speaking too fast. I could hear the clinking of glasses in the background, the murmur of a crowded room. We are at the country club. Preston just bought a round of drinks for the entire members' lounge. I didn't say anything. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to fill it. Anyway, Dad, I am calling because Mom wanted me to tell you. It is official. The wedding is next month. I looked out at the river. A small sailboat was fighting against the current. Next month? I asked. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago. That is a very fast timeline. It is a whirlwind romance, Dad, Jamal said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. When you know, you know. Preston doesn't like to wait. He is a man of action, not like, he makes things happen. I closed my eyes. Even from 4,000 miles away, the comparison stung, not because I was jealous of Preston, but because my son was so easily seduced by the flash of fool's gold. The venue is the Gold Coast Ballroom, Jamal continued, bragging now. 500 guests. Lobster flown in from Maine. It is going to be the event of the decade. Mom is going to look like a queen. That sounds expensive, I said dryly. I hope she has a good prenup. There was a pause, and then a rustling sound. The phone was being moved. Give me that, a female voice hissed. It was Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, the woman who had once refused to eat my birthday cake because she said it was store-bought. Hello, Bernard, she said. Her voice was dripping with that fake sweetness that is more dangerous than acid. We just wanted to make sure you got the message clearly. We are sending an invitation, just for formality. But honestly, you don't need to come. I gripped the phone tighter. Excuse me? Look, let's be realistic, Tiffany laughed. A sound that grated on my nerves. A ticket from Europe is expensive, especially for someone on a fixed income like you. We don't want you to stress about money. And honestly, Preston has invited senators, CEOs, people from the Forbes list. It might be awkward for you. We don't want you to feel out of place in your old suits. I looked down at my shirt. It was made of Egyptian cotton, tailored by a man in Lisbon who used to dress royalty. But to Tiffany, value was only found in logos, not quality. So, you are calling to uninvite me? I asked, keeping my tone even. We are calling to save you the embarrassment, she corrected, and to let you know that you have been replaced. Preston is going to walk Jamal down the aisle when he renews his vows with me next year. He is going to be the grandfather to our future kids. He is the patriarch now. We just thought you should know so you don't show up and make a scene. She didn't wait for a response. I heard her laugh again, a nervous, high-pitched sound before the line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone to the table. The sun was still shining, the river was still flowing, but the temperature in my world had dropped 10 degrees. Replaced, embarrassment, fixed income. I sat there for a long time, analyzing the conversation. I replayed their words in my head, stripping away the insults to find the data underneath. As an engineer, you learn that noise is often a distraction from the signal. Tiffany and Jamal were making a lot of noise. They were bragging, posturing, insulting. But why? If they were truly happy, if Preston was truly this billionaire savior, why call me? Why go out of their way to tell me not to come? If I was so insignificant, so poor, so past it, why did I still occupy enough real estate in their minds to warrant an international call? I tapped my finger on the table. 1 tap, 2 taps, 3 taps. Fear. That was the signal hidden in the noise. They were afraid. Tiffany's laugh was too loud. Jamal's praise of Preston was too frantic. They sounded like people trying to convince themselves, not me. And then a thought struck me. A cold, hard realization that made me sit up straight. Preston, the venture capitalist, the man who appeared out of nowhere, the man who was spending money like water. I thought about the house Camilla had taken. I thought about the joint accounts she had drained. And then I remembered something else, a small, seemingly insignificant detail from the divorce proceedings, a safety deposit box at the downtown bank. It was in my name, but I had given Camilla access years ago. I had assumed she cleared it out along with everything else. But what if she hadn't? What if she couldn't? And more importantly, I remembered a clause in the property deed of our old house, a mechanic's lien I had placed on the property myself 20 years ago when I rewired the entire estate to industrial standards. It was a technicality, a way to protect the asset in case of a lawsuit against my business. I had never removed it. If Preston was trying to leverage the house for loans, if he was trying to refinance to pay for this event of the decade, that lien would pop up. It would require my signature to clear. But they hadn't asked for my signature, which meant one of 2 things. Either they didn't know about it yet, or they had forged it. I looked at my phone again. "You don't need to come," Tiffany had said. "We don't want you to make a scene." They weren't afraid of me being poor. They were afraid of me being present. I stood up. The peaceful retirement, the sardines, the afternoon naps, they would have to wait. There was a short circuit in the system, and it was threatening to burn down the only thing I still cared about. My name and my legacy. I couldn't let my son, as foolish as he was, destroy himself completely. Or maybe, just maybe, I needed to see the fire with my own eyes to believe it. I opened the airline app on my phone. Tiffany had worried about me affording a ticket. She thought I would be scraping pennies together. I scrolled past the economy seats. I scrolled past business class. I selected first-class suites for the flight to O'Hare tomorrow morning. I wasn't going back for the wedding cake. I was going back to inspect the wiring, because I had a feeling that this wealthy new life my ex-wife was building was wired to explode, and I wanted to be holding the remote control when it happened. "One-way ticket," I whispered to the empty terrace. I went inside to pack. I chose my best suit, the charcoal gray one, the one that looked like armor. They wanted a ghost, they were about to get a haunting. Chicago O'Hare Airport has a specific smell. It smells of industrial cleaner, jet fuel, and anxiety. For 40 years, that smell meant work. It meant I was there to fix a blown transformer in Terminal 3, or troubleshoot the baggage claim conveyor belts that had jammed for the 100th time. But today, stepping off the plane from Lisbon, the smell was different. It smelled like a battlefield. I walked through the automatic doors of the International Arrivals Terminal, not as the hunched-over, exhausted man who had left 6 months ago, but as Bernard King, a man who had spent his mornings swimming in the Atlantic and his afternoons reading philosophy. My charcoal suit fit perfectly across my shoulders. I had lost 20 pounds of stress weight. My beard was trimmed sharp. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a man who owned his own time. I was heading toward the taxi stand, pulling my leather carry-on bag, when a commotion near the VIP pickup area caught my attention. Usually, I would ignore it. Noise is just inefficiency escaping from a system. But then I heard a voice I knew better than my own heartbeat. A voice that used to whisper goodnight to me, but lately had only screamed about my inadequacy. Camilla. I stopped behind a concrete pillar, partially obscured by a group of tourists arguing over a map. I adjusted my sunglasses. I needed to see the enemy before the enemy saw me. There she was, my ex-wife. She was standing on the curb, surrounded by 3 large suitcases that looked brand new. She was wearing a white fur coat, even though it was only October. She looked frantic, constantly checking her reflection in a compact mirror, smoothing her hair, adjusting her diamond earrings. She looked like a woman trying very hard to convince the world she was happy. And then, the cavalcade arrived. It wasn't just one car, it was a production. 3 black SUVs flanked a gleaming silver Bentley flying spur. The cars screeched to a halt with a dramatic flair that was entirely unnecessary for an airport pickup. A driver in a uniform jumped out to open the back door of the Bentley, and out stepped Preston. He looked exactly like his photos on social media. Too much tan, teeth that were blindingly white, and a suit that cost more than my first house. He threw his arms open wide, playing to an audience of nobody. "My queen!" he bellowed. His voice boomed, echoing off the concrete overhang. Chicago is not the same without its brightest star. Camilla squealed like a teenager and ran into his arms. I watched them embrace. It looked rehearsed. It looked like a scene from a soap opera that had been canceled due to bad acting. Jamal was there too, getting out of one of the SUVs, high-fiving the drivers, acting like he was part of a presidential motorcade. Most people walking by stopped to stare. They whispered to each other. "Who is that? Is that a movie star? Is that a billionaire?" I stared too, but I wasn't looking at the fur coat or the white teeth. I was looking at the car. Specifically, I was looking at the rear bumper of the silver Bentley. To the untrained eye, it was a symbol of unlimited wealth, a $200,000 machine. But I am not an untrained eye. I am a master electrician who spent 40 years servicing the garages of Chicago's elite and Chicago's pretenders. My eyes locked onto the license plate frame. It was discreet, black chrome, but I saw the logo etched into the bottom corner, a small, stylized crown with the letters EE, Empire Exotics. A cold smirk touched my lips. Empire Exotics wasn't a dealership. It was a high-end rental agency on the South Side. I knew them well because I had rewired their security system 3 years ago after they had a series of thefts. I knew their inventory. I knew their rates. And I knew that they specialized in renting luxury vehicles to music video producers and influencers who needed to look rich for exactly 24 hours. Real billionaires don't rent cars with rental agency frames. Real billionaires have drivers who own the cars, or they have private plates. Preston Sterling, the venture capitalist who was supposedly reshaping the economy, was picking up his bride in a rental that cost $1,200 a day. I watched as the driver loaded Camilla's bags. I noticed the trunk didn't close automatically. The driver had to push it down firmly. That meant the hydraulic latch was failing. It was a maintenance issue Empire Exotics hadn't fixed yet. Preston wasn't buying the world. He was renting it by the hour. As they peeled away, tires chirping, leaving a cloud of exhaust, I finally moved. I walked to the taxi line, my mind racing. A rental car is not a crime. Maybe his own car was in the shop. Maybe he liked the variety. But coupled with Jamal's desperate phone call, it was a red flag the size of a billboard. "Driver," I said as I slid into the back of a yellow cab, "take me to First National Bank on Dearborn Street." I didn't go to my hotel. I didn't go to get food. I went straight to the money. First National was a cathedral of marble and brass. It was where I had banked for 30 years. It was where I had deposited my first paycheck as an apprentice. It was where I had signed the mortgage for the house that Camilla now called her own. I walked in, the cool air conditioning hitting my face. The security guard, old Mike, looked up from his desk. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Mr. King, is that you? You look different. You look 10 years younger, man." "Travel agrees with me, Mike," I said, shaking his hand. "Is Arthur in?" "Mr. Henderson?" "Yeah, he is in his office. Go on back. He has been asking about you." I knocked on the heavy oak door of the branch manager's office. Arthur Henderson, a man I had known since we played high school football together, looked up from his computer. He dropped his pen. "Bernard!" he exclaimed, coming around the desk to hug me. I thought you were gone for good. You look like you just bought the sun. I sat down in the leather chair opposite him. I didn't waste time with small talk. I am an engineer. I identify the fault and I fix it. Arthur, I need to see my file, and I need to ask you a question about the property. Arthur's smile faded. He sat back down, his expression shifting from friendly to professional, and then to something that looked like concern. He tapped a few keys on his keyboard. I assume this is about the recent activity? Arthur asked quietly. What activity? I asked. The divorce decree gave Camilla the house. My name is off the title. I know that. I signed the quitclaim deed. Yes, Arthur said, turning the monitor so I could see. Your name is off the title, but your name is still attached to the original lien history, so I get notified of major changes. Bernard, 2 weeks ago, Camilla refinanced the house. I leaned forward. Refinanced? Ideally, she should own it free and clear. I paid off that mortgage 5 years ago. She took out a home equity line of credit, Arthur said, pointing to a figure on the screen, a massive one. She pulled out 80% of the home's appraised value. That is $600,000, Bernard, in cash. The room went silent. The hum of the server in the corner seemed to grow louder. $600,000. That was the safety net I had built for her. That was the roof over her head. Why? I asked. Why would she need that kind of liquidity? She has half my savings. She has the alimony. Arthur hesitated. He looked at the door to make sure it was closed. She came in here with him, Bernard. That guy. Sterling. He did all the talking. He told the loan officer, who, by the way, was very charmed by him, that he needed bridge capital for a unicorn investment opportunity. He used a lot of buzzwords. Blockchain. AI integration. He said he was letting Camilla in on the ground floor because he loved her. He said he was going to triple her money in 3 months. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't anger. It was the sickening feeling of watching a building collapse in slow motion because someone removed a load-bearing wall. He is a billionaire, Arthur, I said, my voice dripping with irony. Why does a billionaire need his fiancée's house money for bridge capital? Exactly, Arthur whispered. We ran a soft check on him, just standard procedure. Bernard, the man is a ghost. He has credit cards, sure. He has an LLC registered in Delaware. But he doesn't bank with any of the majors in Chicago. His wealth seems to be entirely liquid and moving constantly. But Camilla, she signed the papers. She was looking at him like he was a god. She wired the funds to his LLC account the same day. I sat back, staring at the ceiling. The rental Bentley. The frantic phone call from Jamal telling me not to come. The $600,000 extracted from the house like marrow from a bone. It wasn't just a bad marriage. It was a harvest. Preston Sterling wasn't marrying my wife. He was consuming her assets, and Jamal, my foolish, greedy son, was probably next in line to be eaten. Does Jamal know? I asked. Arthur shook his head. Jamal co-signed as a witness. He was talking about buying a Lamborghini with his share of the profits. I stood up. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of the stupidity I was witnessing. They had called me a failure. They had called me cheap. And all the while, they were handing the keys to the kingdom to a man who didn't even own his own car. Thank you, Arthur, I said, buttoning my jacket. Bernard, what are you going to do? Arthur asked, standing up. It is legal. She signed it willingly. You can't stop it. I walked to the door and looked back. The old Bernard would have rushed to her house, begged her to stop, screamed at her until she listened. The old Bernard would have tried to save her from herself. But the old Bernard was dead. He died in that parking lot when she threw a bus pass at him. I am not going to stop it, Arthur, I said, my voice cold and steady. I am just going to make sure that when the lights go out, I am the only one holding a flashlight. I walked out of the bank and into the Chicago wind. It cut through my suit, but I didn't feel it. I had a wedding to prepare for, and I needed to make sure I had a front row seat when the check finally came due. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Tiffany. Reminder, the rehearsal dinner is for wedding party only. Don't embarrass us by showing up. I looked at the message and typed a reply. Understood. I will just be a spectator. I hit send. A spectator. Yes, that is exactly what I would be. A spectator at an execution. But first, I had one more stop to make. I needed to visit the one place Preston Sterling would never expect me to go. I needed to visit the rental car agency, because if I knew Empire Exotics, they kept detailed records of who drove their cars, and more importantly, whose credit card was actually on file. I raised my hand for a taxi. The game had just changed. They were playing checkers with money they didn't have. I was about to play chess with the truth. And the truth, as I have learned in 74 years of life, is the only thing that never devalues. The Gilded Horn is the kind of restaurant where the lighting is intentionally dim, the menus have no prices, and the waiters look down on you if you ask what the soup of the day is. It is a temple of excess in the heart of Chicago, a place where people go not to eat, but to be seen eating. I walked in 5 minutes late. I had spent the afternoon watching my ex-wife's house from a coffee shop across the street, observing a moving truck take away the last of the furniture I had built with my own hands. Now, I was ready to see the people who were spending the proceeds. The maitre d', a young man with slicked back hair and a sneer practiced in a mirror, tried to stop me. "Do you have a reservation, sir?" he asked, his eyes scanning my suit, looking for a reason to turn me away. "I am with the Sterling party," I said, my voice calm and authoritative. His face changed instantly. "Ah, Mr. Sterling, the VIP room, right this way." He led me through the main dining room, past tables of politicians and athletes, to a semi-private alcove in the back. They were already seated, Camilla looking like a disco ball in a sequin dress that was far too young for her, Jamal nervously nursing a scotch, Tiffany scrolling through her phone, ignoring everyone, and Preston. Preston sat at the head of the table, his arms spread wide along the back of the leather booth, claiming space like a silverback gorilla. When he saw me, his smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a predator's grin. "Bernard!" he boomed, standing up halfway but not actually offering a hand. "We didn't think you would actually come. We thought the flight might be too much for your constitution." I pulled out the empty chair opposite him. "My constitution is fine, Preston. I survived 40 Chicago winters working on power lines. A first-class flight is hardly a challenge." Tiffany looked up from her phone. Her eyes raked over my charcoal suit, the one I had bought from the tailor in Lisbon who dresses Portuguese diplomats. She wrinkled her nose. "Is that what you are wearing to the wedding, Bernard?" she asked, her voice loud enough to turn heads at the next table. "It looks a bit boxy. Did you pick it up at a discount outlet? We really wanted this to be a black tie affair. We don't want you looking like the help." I smoothed the lapel of my jacket. The fabric was Super 150S wool, soft as butter. It cost more than her first car. "It is custom made," said softly. "In Europe, we prefer fit over flash." She rolled her eyes. "Europe, please. You probably bought it at a tourist trap." Preston is wearing Tom Ford. That is what success looks like. Camilla placed a hand on Preston's arm, marking her territory. "Don't be mean, Tiffany. Bernard does the best with what he has. He has always been frugal." Preston chuckled. "Let's get the man a drink. Waiter." A sommelier appeared instantly, holding a leather-bound wine list. "Bring us the Chateau Margaux, 1996, Preston commanded without even looking at the list. "And bring a tasting glass for my friend here." He pointed a thick finger at me. "Bernard, I want you to taste this. You probably drink that box stuff, right? Or maybe beer. This will educate your palate. It is a $2,000 bottle. Try not to gulp it." The table went silent. Jamal looked down at his plate. He knew I didn't drink boxed wine. He knew I had built a small wine cellar in our basement years ago, before Camilla turned it into a shoe closet. The sommelier poured a small amount of the dark red liquid into a glass and placed it in front of me. Preston watched me with amusement, waiting for me to be overwhelmed, to be grateful for his charity. I picked up the glass. I swirled it gently. I held it to the light. The color was slightly off, a bit too brown at the edges for a 96. I took a sniff. Cork, I thought. The wine was corked. It had turned. It smelled like wet cardboard and vinegar. I looked at Preston. He was beaming, expecting me to praise him. "Well?" he asked. "What do you think? Can you taste the oak? The history?" I set the glass down. "It is certainly distinct," I said diplomatically. "It has a very pungent aroma. I think it suits you perfectly, Preston." He didn't catch the insult. He laughed and clapped his hands. "Pour it for everyone. We are celebrating." "Celebrating what?" I asked. Preston leaned forward, his elbows on the table. The future, Bernard. My future. Our future. I just closed a seed round for my tech startup. We are going to revolutionize the way people buy groceries on the blockchain. Jamal here is going to be my vice president of operations. I looked at my son. Jamal, you are leaving your job at the logistics firm? That is a union job with benefits. Jamal finally looked at me. His eyes were defiant, but his hands were shaking. Dad, stop living in the past. Unions are for old people. Preston is giving me equity, stock options. When the company goes public in 2 years, I will be worth $10 million. And what is your salary until then? I asked. Jamal hesitated. We are taking a nominal salary to maximize growth, but Preston is covering my expenses. He is taking care of us. I looked at Camilla. She was nodding vigorously. He is so generous, Bernard. He paid off Jamal's student loans last week. Did you see the receipt? I asked her. Or did he just tell you he did it? Bernard! Camilla snapped. Why do you always have to be so negative? Why can't you just be happy that our son finally has a father figure who knows how to win? The words hung in the air like smoke. A father figure. Jamal cleared his throat. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it, he just held it. Actually, Dad, there is something I need to tell you, Jamal said. Go on, son, Preston encouraged him, leaning back and taking a sip of the spoiled wine. He grimaced slightly but didn't say anything, too proud to admit he had ordered vinegar. Jamal took a deep breath. Dad, about the wedding. We talked about it. And, well, usually the father of the groom stands next to the groom. But what? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. But Preston is the one who made this wedding possible, Jamal said, the words rushing out. He paid for the venue. He paid for the honeymoon. He has been more of a father to me in 6 months than you were in 30 years. You taught me how to save pennies. You taught me how to make millions. Jamal looked at Preston, seeking approval. So, Jamal continued, I asked Preston to be my best man, and to stand in the father's place during the ceremony. He will give the toast. He will sign the registry. And where do I stand? I asked. Tiffany chimed in, smiling cruelly. You are a guest, Bernard. We have a table for you near the back, next to Great Aunt Martha. You know, the deaf one. We didn't want you to feel pressured to make a speech. We know you aren't very articulate. I looked at the 4 of them. My ex-wife, who sold our memories for a rental car ride. My daughter-in-law, who measured human worth in Instagram likes. My son, who was trading his dignity for stock options in a company that didn't exist. And Preston, the conductor of this train wreck, drinking rotten wine and thinking it was nectar. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain. It was relief. The final tether had been cut. I was free. I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket. I understand, I said. Preston laughed. No hard feelings, old sport. It is just business, evolution, survival of the fittest. I picked up my water glass. To the groom, I said, looking at Jamal, may your equity be as real as your loyalty. I turned to Preston. And to the new patriarch, I hope your wallet is as thick as your mouth, Preston, because carrying this family is heavier than it looks. Preston's smile faltered for a second. What is that supposed to mean? It means, enjoy the dinner, I said. I have an early flight to catch, or at least, that is what I am telling myself. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on me. I could hear Tiffany whispering, God, he is so bitter. I walked past the open kitchen, past the wine cellar, and stopped at the host stand near the front door. I waited. I wasn't leaving just yet. I pretended to check my coat, lingering in the shadows of the foyer. Through the glass partition, I watched the waiter approach their table with the bill. It was a black leather folder. Preston snatched it up with a flourish, not even checking the total. He pulled out a black metal credit card and tossed it onto the tray like a throwing star. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. The waiter walked to the terminal at the side station. He swiped the card. He frowned. He wiped the strip on his apron and swiped it again. He tapped the screen. He walked back to the table. He leaned down and whispered something to Preston. Preston laughed loudly, waving his hand. He said something that looked like, try it again. The waiter went back, swiped again. Then he picked up the phone next to the register. He spoke for a moment, then hung up. He walked back to the table, this time without the folder. I saw Preston's face change. The red flush started at his neck and crept up to his hairline. He patted his pockets. He pulled out another card, a blue one. He gave it to the waiter. The waiter returned to the terminal. Swipe. Pause. Shake head. I saw Camilla reach into her purse. She pulled out a card, but Preston stopped her. He grabbed her wrist. He was arguing with the waiter now. I could see his gestures getting wilder. He was pointing at his suit, pointing at the table, probably screaming, "Do you know who I am?" The manager began to walk over. That was all I needed to see. The first crack in the dam. The water was starting to leak through. I pushed open the heavy front door and stepped out into the cool Chicago night. The air tasted sweet. "Hey, buddy," a valet called out. "You need your car?" "No," I said, flagging down a passing taxi. "I don't have a car. I have a bus pass, and it is the most valuable thing in the world right now because it is paid for." As the taxi pulled away, I looked back at the restaurant. Through the window, I saw Preston standing up, red-faced, while Jamal frantically searched his own empty pockets. The dinner was on them, but the real bill? The real bill was coming tomorrow, and the interest rate was going to be deadly. The wind off Lake Michigan in October cuts through you like a knife. But on the deck of the yacht Preston had chartered, the cold was the only honest thing present. The vessel was named the Golden Horizon, 120 feet of fiberglass and vanity bobbing in the dark water. It was impressive, I will admit. Waiters in white tuxedos circulated with trays of caviar that looked like buckshot, and a jazz quartet played softly in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the wind. I stood by the railing, clutching a glass of sparkling water. I watched the city skyline drift by, the lights of Chicago shimmering like distant stars. It was the city I had helped power, grid by grid, wire by wire. Now, I felt like a stranger floating past it. Tiffany had made it clear that my presence was tolerated, not desired. She had placed me at a small, high-top table near the stern, away from the heat lamps and the VIP seating. But from my vantage point in the shadows, I could see everything. I was the safety inspector looking at a building that was about to be condemned. The center of gravity, as always, was Preston. He was holding court near the bow, surrounded by a group of men who looked hungry. Not hungry for food, but for the kind of easy money that ruins lives. Jamal was right next to him, practically vibrating with excitement. My son looked like a child who had been invited to the grown-ups table for the first time, unaware that he was actually on the menu. I moved closer, keeping to the edge of the crowd. I wanted to hear the pitch. "Gentlemen," Preston's voice carried over the wind, loud and confident. "The banking system is a dinosaur. It is slow. It is regulated by people who want to keep you poor. What I am offering you is not just an investment. It is an exit strategy from the Matrix." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. A graph appeared, a jagged green line shooting upward toward infinity. "We call it Liberty Coin," Preston said, his eyes gleaming. "It is backed by lithium deposits in South America that my firm has exclusive rights to. We are talking about 300% returns in the first quarter, conservative estimates." I watched Jamal's face. He was staring at the phone screen with a mixture of awe and greed. He wasn't asking about the mining permits. He wasn't asking about the blockchain auditing. He was just seeing the imaginary zeros adding up in his bank account. "I'm in," one of the guests said. A man I recognized as a local car dealership owner. "Put me down for 50. 50,000, Preston laughed, a dismissive sound. "That is a good starter position, Mike, but the real tier begins at 200. That is where you get the founder's equity." "I'll do 200, Jamal blurted out. My heart stopped. $200,000. That was everything. That was the money from the house refinance. That was the money Camilla needed to live on when this house of cards collapsed. Preston clapped a hand on Jamal's shoulder, squeezing it tight. "That is my boy. That is vision. You see, gentlemen, this young man understands the future. He is not afraid to pull the trigger. I wanted to step in. I wanted to grab Jamal by the lapels and shake him until his teeth rattled. I wanted to scream that lithium rights are public record, and if Preston really had them, he wouldn't be pitching to car dealers on a rental boat in Chicago. He would be on Wall Street. But I knew Jamal wouldn't listen. He was drunk on the proximity to power. To intervene now would only make me the villain in their success story. Then, the sliding glass doors of the main cabin opened, and Camilla stepped out. If Preston was the king of this delusion, Camilla was the queen. She was wearing a silver gown that hugged curves she had maintained with expensive surgeries. But what caught the light wasn't the dress. It was the necklace. It was a cascading waterfall of diamonds, wrapping around her neck and dripping down toward her chest. It was massive, ostentatious. It had to be 50 carats comfortably. Preston left the circle of men and walked over to her, taking her hand and kissing it. "And here is the inspiration for it all," he announced. "My beautiful bride, wearing the Sterling family diamonds. These stones have been in my vault for generations." The crowd oh'd and awed. Tiffany rushed over, snapping photos with her phone, the flash blinding in the dark. "Oh my God, Camilla, you look like royalty," Tiffany squealed. "Those are insane." Camilla touched the stones at her throat, her face flushed with pride. She looked at me, spotting me in the shadows. She lifted her chin, a gesture of pure defiance. "See what I have?" her eyes said. "See what you could never give me?" I took a step closer. The engineer in me took over. I have a habit, a compulsion really, to understand how things are made. Years ago, for our 30th anniversary, I had saved for 3 years to buy Camilla a sapphire pendant. It wasn't huge, but it was flawless. I had spent weeks with a gemologist, learning about clarity, cut, and the refractive index. I learned how light behaves when it enters a dense stone. I learned that a real diamond has a very specific way of breaking light. It handles light with dignity. It flashes gray and white, with subtle fires of orange or blue. I narrowed my eyes, focusing on the necklace as Camilla moved under the deck lights. The stones were flashing, but they were flashing too much. They were throwing out a disco ball effect. Reds, greens, purples. It was a chaotic explosion of color. That is known as double refraction. Diamonds are singly refractive. They don't split light like that. Moissanite does. Cubic zirconia does. High-end lead glass does. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. The Sterling family diamonds, stones that had been in his vault for generations. It was a lie. A physical, provable lie hanging right around my ex-wife's neck. If the diamonds were fake, the lithium mines were fake, the coin was fake, the man was fake. I looked at Preston. He was basking in the adoration, his arm around Camilla's waist. He looked invincible. But I saw the sweat on his upper lip, despite the freezing wind. I saw the way his eyes darted around the perimeter, constantly scanning, constantly checking. He wasn't a billionaire relaxing on his yacht. He was a fugitive hiding in plain sight. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't raise it high. I held it at chest level, pretending to check a message. "Hey, Preston," I called out, my voice cutting through the chatter. He looked over, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it, Bernard?" "I just wanted to say," I continued, stepping into the light, "that is a magnificent setting. It reminds me of the pieces they sell on the Miracle Mile." Preston stiffened. His smile froze. For a split second, the mask slipped. He knew that I knew. He saw the calculation in my eyes. "Thank you, Bernard," he said curtly. "Now if you will excuse us." He turned Camilla away, shielding her from me, shielding the lie from the only person on the boat who knew how to use a jeweler's loop. But it was too late. I had the shot. I looked down at my screen. The image was crisp. Preston's face was illuminated by the deck lights, clear as day. I opened my encrypted messaging app. I scrolled down to a contact saved as Frank the Shark. Frank was an old friend from the neighborhood. We used to play chess in the park on Sundays. Frank was also a senior fraud investigator for one of the largest insurance underwriters in the Midwest. He spent his days hunting down people who faked their own deaths or burned down their own warehouses. He had a database that the FBI would be jealous of. I attached the photo. I typed a simple message. "Frank, do me a favor. Run facial recognition on this guy. Goes by Preston Sterling. Claims to be VC. I think he is wearing glass and selling fog. Let me know what hits." I pressed send. The little circle spun for a second, then turned into a check mark. Sent. I looked up. Jamal was shaking hands with Preston, sealing the deal on the $200,000 investment. Camilla was laughing, touching her fake diamonds, oblivious to the fact that she was wearing a symbol of her own bankruptcy. I finished my sparkling water. It tasted flat. I had done my part. I had gathered the data. Now, I just had to wait for the lab results. As I walked toward the gangplank to leave the party early, Tiffany blocked my path. She had a glass of champagne in her hand and a smirk on her face. "Leaving so soon, Bernard?" she asked. "It must be hard, seeing what a real provider looks like." I looked at her. I looked at the yacht that wasn't theirs. I looked at the jewelry that wasn't real. And I looked at the son I had lost to this illusion. "It is educational, Tiffany," I said quietly. "I am learning a lot tonight." "About what? Being second best?" "No," I said, stepping around her. "About the cost of tuition." I walked down the ramp onto the solid concrete of the dock. The ground beneath my feet felt good, stable, real. Behind me, the yacht party continued, a floating bubble of lies drifting on a dark, cold lake. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a reply from Frank. On it, "Give me 24 hours. If he is who I think he is, you might want to stay clear of the blast radius." I buttoned my coat against the wind. I wasn't going to stay clear. I was going to be right in the center of it. Because when this bomb went off, I needed to make sure the debris didn't bury the only thing I had left to save, my own dignity. The countdown had begun. It was 11 o'clock at night when the knock came. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a rhythmic, impatient pounding that shook the heavy door of my hotel room. I had been sitting in the armchair by the window, reading a report on industrial surplus value, trying to distract myself from the image of my ex-wife wearing a necklace made of glass. I knew who was at the door before I even opened it. There is a specific cadence to desperation, and my son Jamal had been broadcasting it for 2 days. I opened the door. Jamal stood in the hallway, bathed in the yellow fluorescent light. He looked terrible. His tie was loosened, hanging askew like a noose he had failed to tighten properly. His eyes were bloodshot, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the air-conditioned chill of the hotel. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask if I was busy. He simply pushed past me into the room, bringing with him the smell of stale scotch and expensive cologne. I closed the door gently. I watched him pace the small, carpeted area between the bed and the desk. He was vibrating with nervous energy, his hands opening and closing into fists. "Do you want some water, Jamal?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "You look dehydrated." "I don't need your water, Dad," he snapped, spinning around to face me. "I need you to be reasonable. For once in your life, I need you to stop being a roadblock and start being a team player." I walked over to the minibar and poured a glass of water anyway. I placed it on the desk. "I am always reasonable," I said. "That is why I am an engineer. Reason is what keeps buildings from falling down. What is the emergency, son?" Jamal reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a document, folded into thirds. It looked like it had been handled roughly. He smoothed it out on the desk, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. "It's the trust," he said. "The education fund you set up for the grandkids." I looked at the paper. It was the deed to the King Family Trust. It wasn't a fortune. It was $50,000 that I had scraped together over 20 years. Every time I worked a holiday, every time I took a double shift in a freezing basement, I put $100 into that account. It was meant to ensure that if Jamal ever had children, they wouldn't have to start at zero like I did. "What about it?" I asked. "It is sitting in a conservative bond index. It is safe." "That is the problem," Jamal shouted, throwing his hands up. "It is safe. It is stagnant. It is making 3% a year, Dad. 3%. Inflation is eating it alive." "And let me guess," I said, leaning against the wall. "Preston has a better idea?" Jamal's eyes lit up with that fanatical gleam I had seen on the yacht. "Yes." Preston looked at the portfolio. "He laughed, Dad. He actually laughed. He said it was money under a mattress. He wants to move it into his liquidity pool. He can guarantee 15% monthly returns. He wants to manage it for us, for free, because he cares about the family legacy." I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It wasn't a heart attack. It was the heartbreak of realizing that my son wasn't just a victim. He was a willing accomplice to his own destruction. He was willing to take the only pure thing I had created, a safety net for unborn children, and feed it to a wolf. "So you were here to get me to sign over the trustee rights?" I asked. "I am here to get you to sign the release," Jamal corrected. "Preston needs full authorization to move the principal, tonight. The market opens in Tokyo in 3 hours, and he wants to position the capital before the morning bell." "And if I refuse?" I asked. Jamal stopped pacing. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something truly dark in his face. It was the look of a man who had burned so many bridges, he had no choice but to jump into the fire. "Don't make this ugly, Dad," he said, his voice dropping to a menace. "Preston has lawyers, powerful lawyers. If you claim to be managing this money, but you are mismanaging it by letting it stagnate, that is a breach of fiduciary duty. We can sue you. We can have you declared incompetent." Preston said he could have a competency hearing scheduled by Monday. "Do you want to spend your retirement fighting a legal battle you can't afford?" I stared at him. My own son was threatening to declare me senile. He was threatening to drag me through the mud, to destroy my reputation, all to get his hands on $50,000 to give to a con artist. I realized then that the boy I raised was gone. The boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. The boy who used to help me carry my toolbox. He had been consumed. What stood before me was a hollow shell, filled with another man's lies. "You would do that?" I asked softly. "You would sue your own father." Jamal flinched, just for a second. But then the greed took over again. "I am doing what is best for the family," he said, reciting the script. "I am maximizing our assets. Just sign the paper, Dad. Don't be a dinosaur." I walked over to the desk. I looked at the document. It was a standard transfer of trusteeship. It gave Jamal full control over the principal amount, effective immediately. If I signed this as it was, the money would be gone by morning. Preston would drain it, use it to pay off the catering bill or the yacht rental, and my grandchildren would be left with nothing. But if I didn't sign, Jamal would cause a scene. He would drag this out. He would scream and threaten, and honestly, I was tired. I was so incredibly tired of fighting a war against people who were determined to surrender. But I am a master electrician. When you can't stop the current, you divert it. You install a breaker. "Okay," I said. I picked up a pen from the hotel desk. Jamal let out a breath he had been holding. "Thank God, finally. You are making the right choice." I put the tip of the pen to the paper, but I didn't sign at the bottom. Not yet. "I'm going to add a small annotation," I said casually. "Just for my own records, to show that I acted in good faith." "Whatever," Jamal said, checking his watch. "Just hurry up." I found the clause regarding the disbursement of funds. In clear, block letters, I crossed out "immediate access" and wrote in the margin, "Funds to remain frozen in escrow until the named beneficiary reaches the age of 18 years. Transfer of management authorized only under these conditions." It was a restrictive covenant. It meant that even if Jamal became the trustee, he couldn't touch the principal. He could move it to Preston's fund if he wanted, but the bank wouldn't release the cash to them. It would just sit there, locked tight, until a child who didn't exist yet became an adult. I signed my name at the bottom with a flourish. "There," I said, "it is all yours." Jamal snatched the paper from under my hand before the ink was even dry. He didn't read it. He didn't even look at the paragraph I had altered. He just saw the signature at the bottom. That was all he cared about, the victory. "About time," he muttered, folding the paper and shoving it back into his pocket. "Preston is going to be pleased. This shows commitment." He turned to the door. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say goodbye. He had what he wanted. "Jamal," I said. He stopped, his hand on the doorknob. "What?" "I hope you read the fine print on everything Preston gives you," I said, "because the devil is always in the details." He scoffed. "Preston doesn't have fine print. He operates on a handshake. That is how real business is done." He opened the door and walked out, slamming it behind him. I stood alone in the silence of the hotel room. I walked over to the window and looked down at the street. I watched as my son ran out of the hotel entrance, jumped into a waiting cab, and sped off into the night. He was rushing to deliver a locked box to a thief who didn't have the key. I felt a profound sense of sadness, but no regret. I had saved the money. I had protected the future, but I had lost the present. My son was gone. He was driving toward a cliff, pressing the accelerator to the floor, convinced he was learning how to fly. I went back to the armchair and picked up my report. The dossier from Frank was waiting. I turned the page. Attached was a photocopy of a police report from Florida, dated 3 years ago. The mugshot was grainy, but the face was unmistakable. It wasn't Preston Sterling. It was Pete Stalinsky, arrested for selling fake timeshares to retirees. I looked at the date of the wedding, 2 days away. I took a sip of the water I had poured for Jamal. It was cool and clean. "Sleep well, son," I whispered to the empty room. "You are going to need your rest, because when you wake up, the nightmare is going to be very, very real." The Gold Coast ballroom had been transformed into a botanical garden. It was a spectacle of excess that bordered on the obscene. Thousands of white orchids, likely flown in from Thailand that very morning, hung from the ceiling in cascading waterfalls. The scent was so thick it felt like walking into a perfume factory. A 20-piece symphony orchestra sat on a raised platform, playing Mozart with a precision that cost $500 an hour per musician. Everything about the room screamed wealth. Everything about it was designed to say, "Look at us. Look at how much we have. Look at how far we have risen." But I am an engineer. I don't look at the decoration. I look at the structure. I looked at the floor and saw that the heavy floral arrangements were blocking the fire exits. I looked at the lighting rig and saw that the cables were taped down haphazardly, a lawsuit waiting to happen. And I looked at the people, my family, and saw a foundation that was already crumbling into dust. I stood at the entrance, holding my invitation. A young usher with a clipboard looked at my name, then looked at me, then looked down at his list again. He hesitated, his face flushed with second-hand embarrassment. "Mr. King," he said softly. Right this way." He didn't lead me to the front, where the family usually sits. He didn't lead me to the middle, where the friends and colleagues were chatting. He walked me past the ice sculptures, past the chocolate fountains, past the rows of velvet chairs reserved for the people Preston was trying to impress. We kept walking until we reached the back wall. "Here we are, sir," the usher mumbled, not making eye contact. "Table 42. It was the very last table in the room. It was positioned directly next to the swinging double doors of the kitchen, where waiters were rushing in and out with trays of food, creating a constant clatter of silverware and shouting. To my left was the entrance to the restrooms. Every time someone opened the door, the smell of industrial air freshener and plumbing wafted over our centerpiece. I sat down. My companions at the table were a collection of ghosts from the past. There was Great Aunt Martha, who was 90 years old and thought she was at a bingo hall. There was a second cousin from Camilla's side, who I hadn't seen in 15 years and who was already drunk. And there were 3 empty chairs. Even the outcasts didn't want to sit here. This was it. This was my place in their new world. I wasn't just an ex-husband. I was garbage. I was something to be hidden away near the toilets and the trash. I placed my hands on the tablecloth. It was silk. I calculated the cost of this wedding in my head. The flowers, the venue, the orchestra, the food. It had to be upwards of $300,000. Half the money Camilla had extracted from the house was already gone, burned up in a 6-hour party to celebrate a fraud. I poured myself a glass of water from the pitcher. I didn't drink the wine. I needed a clear head. Suddenly, a sharp jolt rocked my chair. I looked up. Tiffany was standing over me. She was wearing a bridesmaid dress that was cut too low and cost too much. Her face was caked in makeup, but it couldn't hide the ugliness of her expression. She had kicked the leg of my chair with her heel. "Oops," she said, her voice dripping with fake innocence. "I didn't see you there, Bernard. You blend in so well with the service staff." She leaned in closer, her perfume overpowering the smell of the kitchen. "I hope you are comfortable," she whispered. "We thought this location was appropriate. It is where the waste goes. That is what you are, right? Waste. You are the past that we are flushing away." I looked at her. I looked at the young woman who had married my son. I remembered when she first met Jamal. She had been sweet then, or maybe she was just better at acting. Now, the mask was gone. She was a scavenger bird, picking at the bones of a kill she didn't make. "You look lovely, Tiffany," I said calmly. "Enjoy the music. It is expensive." She sneered. "Don't worry about the cost. Preston has it covered. He has more money in his couch cushions than you made in your entire life." She turned on her heel and strutted away, swaying her hips, eager to get back to the cameras and the attention. I watched her go. I felt a strange sense of pity. She thought she was winning. She thought kicking an old man's chair made her powerful. She didn't know that she was standing on a trap door, and I was holding the lever. I turned my attention to the front of the room. The ceremony was about to begin. Preston stood at the altar. He was wearing a white tuxedo jacket with black lapels. He looked like a game show host from the 1970s. To the rest of the room, he probably looked confident. He was smiling, waving to people, shaking hands. But I pulled out my glasses. I put them on. I focused. Preston was melting. Even though the ballroom was kept at a crisp 68 degrees, beads of sweat were rolling down his forehead. His collar was wet. He kept wiping his palms on his trousers, and he couldn't stop moving. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. He adjusted his tie. He touched his cufflinks. But the biggest tell was the phone. Every 30 seconds, when he thought no one was looking, he would slide his phone out of his pocket, glance at the screen, and then shove it back in. His expression would tighten for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of pure panic, before he plastered the smile back on. I knew that look. It is the look of a contractor who realizes he forgot to install the support beams, and the concrete is already pouring. He was waiting for something. A wire transfer, a confirmation, or maybe a warning. Jamal was standing next to him, beaming with pride, puffing out his chest. My son looked at Preston with total adoration. He didn't see the sweat. He didn't see the panic. He only saw the white tuxedo and the promise of millions. The orchestra swelled. The wedding march began. The heavy double doors at the back of the room opened. Everyone stood up. Everyone turned to look. Camilla appeared. She was wearing a dress that must have cost $20,000. It was encrusted with crystals. She had a tiara on her head. She looked beautiful, in a way, but she also looked terrifying. Her smile was fixed, rigid. She walked down the aisle, clutching a bouquet of white roses so tightly her knuckles were white. She walked past me without a glance. She didn't see the man who had loved her when she had nothing. She only saw the altar. She only saw the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. As she reached the front, Preston stepped down to meet her. He took her hand. I saw him lean in and whisper something in her ear. From the distance, it looked romantic. The guests sighed. Aunt Martha next to me clapped her hands and said, "Oh, true love." But I read lips. I have had to communicate with crew members across noisy construction sites for 40 years. I watched Preston's mouth move. He didn't say, "You look beautiful." He didn't say, "I love you." He said, "Did the wire clear yet?" Camilla's smile didn't waver, but her eyes widened slightly. She whispered back, "I don't know. I gave you the confirmation code." Preston nodded, a jerky, nervous motion. He patted her hand, but his eyes went back to his pocket, back to the phone hidden in his jacket. I sat back in my chair. The puzzle pieces were locking into place. The rental car, the fake diamonds, the desperate need for cash, and now the panic at the altar. Preston wasn't just a con man. He was a desperate con man. He was running a Ponzi scheme that was collapsing in real time. He needed Camilla's money not to invest, but to pay off someone else. Maybe the venue, maybe the caterers, or maybe a shark more dangerous than a loan officer. I looked around the room at the 500 guests, senators, business owners, my own family. They were all watching a fairy tale. I was the only one watching a heist. The officiant began to speak. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." I reached into the inside pocket of my suit. I touched the cool paper of the police report I had printed out at the hotel business center. I also touched the second envelope, the one containing the email from Frank regarding the facial recognition match. I wasn't going to stop the wedding. That would be too easy. I was going to let them say I do. I was going to let the knot be tied. Because when you demolish a building, you don't knock it down halfway. You wait until the structure is fully committed to gravity, and then you pull the pin. I took a sip of water. It was warm. Go ahead, Preston, I thought. Say the vows. Promise to love and to cherish. Because the only thing you are going to be cherishing tonight is the right to remain silent. Tiffany turned around from the front row and glared at me, making sure I was staying in my place. I raised my glass to her and smiled. She had no idea. None of them did. The man at the table by the toilet was about to become the most important person in the room. The ceremony reached its crescendo under the crystal chandeliers. The officiant, a man with a booming voice that sounded like he was narrating a movie trailer, asked the question that seals a fate. "Do you, Preston Sterling, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold, in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth?" Preston didn't answer immediately. I saw his throat bob as he swallowed. He was looking out at the audience, his eyes darting back and forth, scanning the room like a man looking for the nearest fire exit. He took a breath that shuddered in his chest. "I do," he said. But he didn't stop there. He turned to Camilla, grabbing both her hands. The sweat was now visible on his upper lip, glistening under the stage lights. He needed to sell this. He needed to perform. "Camilla," he announced, his voice projecting to the back of the room where I sat next to the kitchen door. "I don't just promise to be your husband. I promise to be your kingdom. I promise that from this day forward, you will never know want. You will never know limits. I will take you to the heights of the world, where you belong. You are not just marrying a man. You are marrying a destiny." The crowd gasped. A few women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. My Aunt Martha, who was halfway through a bread roll she had smuggled in her purse, sighed loudly. "Oh, isn't that romantic? He speaks like a poet." I leaned back in my chair. He didn't speak like a poet. He spoke like a politician trying to get elected before a scandal broke. I had heard similar speeches before. I heard them from contractors who promised to finish a job under budget and ahead of schedule, right before they disappeared with the deposit money. It was the language of overcompensation. When the foundation is weak, you decorate the facade with gold paint. Camilla was eating it up. She looked at him with the adoration that made my stomach turn. Not because I still loved her. That ship had sailed the moment she threw my keys on the pavement, but because I knew how much that look was going to cost her. She believed him. She believed that she had finally won the lottery. She didn't realize she was holding a ticket for a drawing that had happened yesterday. "I take you, Preston," she sobbed into the microphone, "to be my king." They exchanged rings. Preston fumbled with the band. His hands were shaking so badly that he almost dropped it. He laughed it off, a nervous, high-pitched chuckle that didn't match his baritone persona. "I'm just so excited, folks," he shouted to the crowd. As he slid the ring onto her finger, I scanned the room again. I am an observer. It is what I do. I look for the anomaly in the circuit. I look for the one wire that is frayed, the one fuse that is too hot. And then I found him. He was sitting at table number 1, the VIP table, the table reserved for the groom's closest family and most important business partners. He was the only person at the table. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit that absorbed the light. He wasn't looking at the bride. He wasn't looking at the groom. He was looking at his watch. He wore tinted glasses, even though we were indoors. He sat with a stillness that was unnatural in a room full of celebrating people. When the couple kissed and the room erupted in applause, he didn't clap. He didn't smile. He simply reached for his glass of water, took a sip, and set it back down in the exact same ring of condensation. Preston pulled away from the kiss. He threw his arms up in victory. The orchestra struck up a triumphant melody. The guests cheered. But Preston's eyes didn't go to his mother. They didn't go to Jamal. They went straight to table 1. He looked at the man in the black suit. The man in the black suit gave a microscopic nod. It wasn't a nod of congratulations. It was the kind of nod a warden gives a prisoner. Acknowledgement. Supervision. Preston's smile faltered. He quickly turned back to Camilla, burying his face in her neck, hiding his expression from the cameras. I knew instantly. That man wasn't a guest. He was a variable that Preston hadn't accounted for, or perhaps a variable that Preston was terrified of. The ceremony ended. The guests began to file out toward the terrace for the cocktail hour, while the ballroom was flipped for dinner. The air filled with the chatter of 500 people discussing how beautiful the vows were and how expensive the flowers must have been. I stood up. My legs were stiff from the cheap chair. I needed to know. I made my way through the crowd. I moved like a ghost. No one stopped to talk to me. To them, I was just the ex-husband, the failure, the shadow of the past. I was invisible. And invisibility is a powerful tool when you are gathering intelligence. I saw the man in the black suit walking toward the bar. He moved with a heavy, deliberate grace. He walked like a man who owned the floorboards beneath his feet. I followed him. The bar was crowded, but people seemed to instinctively clear a path for him. He radiated a cold aura that made the socialites uncomfortable. He didn't order champagne. He didn't order a cocktail. "Soda water with a lime," he told the bartender. I slid into the empty space next to him. I ordered the same. "Nice ceremony," I said, staring straight ahead at the rows of bottles. The man didn't look at me. He just swirled the ice in his glass. "If you like theater, sure," he said. His voice was gravel, deep and rough. It sounded like tires rolling over loose stones. "You don't seem like a fan of the arts," I noted. "I'm a fan of arithmetic," he replied, "and the math here doesn't add up." I turned to look at him. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow. His suit was expensive, Italian cut, but he wore it like a uniform, not a fashion statement. "I'm Bernard," I said. I didn't offer my hand. "I know who you are," he said. He finally turned his head. Behind the tinted lenses, I could feel his eyes assessing me. "You're the ex-husband. The electrician," I corrected him. "Master electrician." He smirked, a small, humorless twitch of the lips. "Right. The man who got away." "Got away?" I asked. "You are the only person in this room who isn't drowning, Bernard. You just don't know it yet." He took a sip of his soda. He looked over my shoulder, toward the terrace where Preston was currently posing for photos, holding a glass of champagne high in the air, laughing manically. "Look at him," the man said softly. "He looks like a man who just won the race, but he doesn't realize he is running on a treadmill." I decided to push. I decided to apply voltage to the circuit and see what sparked. "You are sitting at the VIP table," I said, "but you aren't family, and you definitely aren't a friend. Preston looked at you during the vows like he owed you his soul." The man chuckled, a dry, dark sound. "Not his soul," the man said, "just his life, or at least the version of his life he is trying to sell to these people." He turned his body fully toward me. He took off his glasses. His eyes were cold, gray, and completely devoid of empathy. "I am not a guest, Bernard. I am the reason this circus is happening." "I don't understand," I said, though I was starting to. The man leaned in close. He smelled of expensive tobacco and mint. "Preston Sterling came to my organization 3 months ago. He needed bridge capital. He said he had a wealthy fiancée. He said he had a house he could leverage. He said he had a sucker of a stepson who would sign over a trust fund." My blood ran cold. He knew about the house. He knew about Jamal. "He borrowed heavily," the man continued, "at rates that would make a bank manager vomit. He told us he would pay us back in full, plus interest, the moment the wedding gifts were opened and the joint accounts were merged. He is using this wedding as a fundraising event." I looked out at the terrace. I saw Jamal laughing, shaking hands. I saw Camilla showing off her ring. They were cattle, fattened, happy cattle, unaware that the butcher was sitting at the bar drinking soda water. "And if he doesn't pay?" I asked. The man put his glasses back on. "I am the collection agency, Bernard, and I don't send overdue notices in the mail." He finished his drink in one gulp. He slammed the glass down on the bar. The sound was like a gunshot in the noisy room. "Congratulations on your escape," he said. "You might want to step back when the cake is cut. Things are going to get messy." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of tuxedos and gowns. I stood there, gripping my glass of soda water. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from rage. Preston wasn't just a fraud. He was dangerous. He had brought organized crime into my family. He had leveraged my son's future and my ex-wife's safety against the debt he could never pay. I looked at the happy couple outside. Preston was kissing Camilla again for the cameras. I realized then that the police report in my pocket wasn't just a weapon. It was a mercy killing. If I didn't expose him, the man in the black suit would destroy him, and Camilla and Jamal would be caught in the crossfire. I put $5 on the bar. I adjusted my tie. The reception was starting. The speeches were next. Jamal was going to give a toast. Preston was going to brag. And I was going to sit at my table by the toilet and wait. Because the man in black was right. I had escaped. But I couldn't leave the building just yet. I had to watch it burn, if only to make sure the fire didn't spread to the innocent bystanders, if there were any left. I walked back to table 42. Great Aunt Martha looked up at me with crumbs on her chin. "Who was that handsome man you were talking to?" she asked. "Just a banker, Aunt Martha," I said, sitting down. "Just a banker." But I knew the truth. He was the repo man, and he was here to repossess a life. The dinner service had just concluded, and the waiters were clearing away plates that still held half-eaten filets mignon and lobster tails. It was a waste that made my stomach churn, not because I am cheap, but because I know the value of labor. I know how many hours a man has to stand on a concrete floor to pay for a meal like this. But here, in this ballroom of borrowed money and stolen dreams, waste was treated as a virtue. It was proof that they had so much, they didn't need to care. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, shifting from a warm amber to a dramatic focused spotlight that cut through the darkness and landed on the head table. The chatter died down. The clinking of silverware stopped. Jamal stood up. My son adjusted his tuxedo jacket. He looked handsome, I will give him that. He had my shoulders and his mother's smile. But as he took the microphone from the MC, I saw a stranger. His posture was arrogant, his chin lifted in a way that mimicked Preston exactly. He tapped the microphone twice, thump, thump, a sound that echoed through the massive speaker system. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and my new family," Jamal began. His voice was smooth, practiced. He had clearly rehearsed this in front of a mirror. He paused for effect, letting his gaze sweep over the VIP tables. He didn't look toward the back of the room. He didn't look toward the kitchen doors, where I sat next to the ice machine. "We are here to celebrate love," Jamal continued. "But for me, today isn't just about a wedding. It is about an awakening. It is about realizing that life doesn't have to be a struggle. It doesn't have to be a slow, painful climb up a ladder that leads nowhere." I took a sip of my lukewarm water. I knew where this was going. "Growing up," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a somber, almost tragic tone, "I was taught that money was scarce. I was taught that you had to hoard every penny. I was taught that dreaming big was dangerous because you might fall. My childhood was defined by the word no. No, we can't afford that trip. No, that car is too expensive. No, we don't take risks." A few guests nodded sympathetically. Poor boy, they were thinking. Growing up with a father who paid his bills on time and saved for college. How traumatic. "I was raised in the shadow of fear," Jamal said, gripping the microphone stand. "I was raised by a mindset that believed survival was the same thing as living. I love my biological father, wherever he is." He waved a vague hand toward the back of the room, not even bothering to point at me. It was a dismissal. It was a gesture you would use to shoo away a fly. But he is a man of the past. He is a man of the industrial age. He fixes things that are broken, but he never knew how to build something new. I felt a sharp pang in my chest, but I suppressed it. "I am an engineer." I analyzed his statement. "I fixes things." Yes. I fixed the electrical grid that was currently powering the microphone he was using to insult me. I fixed the safety systems that protected the hospital where he was born. He saw labor as a failure. I saw it as the foundation of civilization. But then, Jamal's face lit up. He turned to Preston. Then I met Preston Sterling. Applause broke out. Preston beamed, waving regally to the crowd. "Preston didn't just step into my mother's life," Jamal said, his voice rising with emotion. "He stepped into mine. He showed me that a man isn't defined by how much he saves, but by how much he generates. He taught me that the only limit is the one you put on yourself. In 6 months, Preston has taught me more about business, about courage, and about being a man than I learned in 35 years of mediocrity." Mediocrity. The word hung in the air. Camilla was sobbing now. She was dabbing her eyes with a silk napkin, looking at Jamal with overwhelming pride. She thought this was beautiful. She thought her son was finally expressing himself. She didn't see that he was reciting a suicide note for his own character. "Preston is the father I never had," Jamal declared. The room went silent for a heartbeat, and then erupted. People were standing up. They were cheering. It was a standing ovation for betrayal. I sat perfectly still. I didn't slouch. I didn't look down. I watched my son destroy our history to please a stranger. "He is a visionary," Jamal shouted over the applause. "He is a titan, and I am honored, truly honored, to call him Dad." He picked up his champagne glass. It was crystal, sparkling under the spotlight. "So I want to propose a toast," Jamal said. The crowd quieted down, waiting for the climax. "To Preston and Camilla, to the union of beauty and power, and to the future. A future where we don't count pennies, we count millions. A future where we don't work for money, we make money work for us. To the Sterling legacy, to the Sterling legacy," the crowd roared back, 500 voices raised in unison. Jamal raised the glass high. He opened his mouth to say one last thing. Maybe he was going to say cheers. Maybe he was going to say, "I love you." We will never know. At that exact second, a loud, sharp pop echoed through the ballroom. It sounded like a gunshot, but I knew better. It was the sound of a main breaker tripping under load. A high-pitched screech of feedback tore through the speakers, causing everyone to cover their ears. And then, darkness. Total, absolute darkness. The spotlight died. The chandeliers died. The exit signs flickered and died. The hum of the air conditioning groaned and wound down to silence. The only light came from the few cell phones that were already out, casting eerie, pale blue shadows on confused faces. For a moment, there was silence, the kind of stunned silence that follows a car crash. Then, the murmurs started. What happened? Is it a storm? Did we blow a fuse? I sat in the dark, my hands still resting on my water glass. I didn't move. I didn't panic. I knew exactly what had happened. This wasn't a technical malfunction. The resort had backup generators. If this were a simple power outage from the grid, the emergency lights would have kicked on within 10 seconds. But 10 seconds passed, 20 seconds. The room remained pitch black. This was a manual disconnect. This was a service termination. I looked toward the front of the room. In the dim glow of a phone flashlight, I saw Preston. He was frozen. He wasn't looking at the ceiling. He wasn't looking for a manager. He was looking at the main entrance doors. Jamal was tapping the dead microphone, looking confused. Dad? Preston? What's going on? I took a slow sip of water. It tasted refreshing now. I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Aunt Martha. Bernard? She whispered, her voice trembling. Is this part of the show? Is this a surprise? I patted her hand gently in the dark. Yes, Aunt Martha, I said softly. This is the surprise. The show is just beginning. I looked toward the back of the room, toward the service entrance. I could hear heavy boots on the parquet floor. Not the frantic footsteps of catering staff trying to fix a problem. These were the rhythmic, heavy steps of men who were coming to take control. Jamal had just toasted to a future where they didn't count pennies. He was about to learn that when you don't count pennies, someone else counts them for you. And when the count comes up short, they turn off the lights. The darkness wasn't an accident. It was an invoice, and it was past due. The darkness didn't last forever, but the silence did. When the backup generators finally kicked in, they didn't restore the warm, golden ambiance of the expensive chandeliers. Instead, harsh blue-white emergency floodlights snapped on, casting long, distorted shadows across the ballroom. The fairy tale atmosphere was gone, instantly. In its place was the stark, clinical lighting of a warehouse or an interrogation room. It exposed everything. It exposed the cheap foundation makeup on Tiffany's face, the sweat drenching Preston's shirt, and the fear in Camilla's eyes. The microphone system popped and hissed as it reconnected to the emergency circuit. A high-pitched squeal of feedback tore through the room, making 500 guests wince in unison. Preston was the first to move. He was a creature of instinct, and his instinct was to deny reality. He tapped the microphone, forcing a smile that looked more like a rictus of pain. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice echoing strangely in the acoustic deadness of the room. "A minor technical glitch. It seems my energy is just too powerful for the grid to handle. Let's give a round of applause for the staff working to fix this." A few people clapped politely, mostly out of confusion, but the applause died quickly because someone was walking onto the stage. It wasn't a technician. It wasn't the wedding planner. It was the general manager of the resort. I knew him by reputation. He was a man who ran his hotel with the ruthless efficiency of a Swiss watchmaker. He walked up the stairs to the head table with a stride that screamed business. He held a wireless payment terminal in one hand and a black folder in the other. He didn't smile. He didn't apologize for the interruption. He walked straight up to Preston. Preston tried to wave him off, covering the microphone with his hand. "Not now, Henri," he hissed. "We are in the middle of a toast." But Preston forgot one thing. In his panic, he hadn't covered the top of the microphone, only the side, and the gain on the emergency system was cranked up to maximum. "Mr. Sterling," the manager said. His voice wasn't shouting, but it was amplified to a deafening volume that reached every corner of the hall, including my table by the kitchen. "We have a problem with the payment for the second installment." Preston laughed nervously, trying to turn his body to block the manager from the audience's view. "A problem? I am sure it is just a wire delay. My bankers in Zurich are probably on a lunch break. We will sort it out Monday." The manager didn't budge. He stepped closer, invading Preston's personal space. "Sir, we ran the 3 cards you provided on file. The American Express Black, the Visa Infinite, and the corporate MasterCard." Preston was sweating profusely now. Under the harsh emergency lights, he looked like he was melting. Yes, I know. High-volume transactions. They trigger security protocols. It happens when you live at my level. Mr. Sterling, the manager cut him off, his voice ice cold. The cards didn't trigger a security protocol. They triggered a fraud alert. 2 of them have been reported stolen from a Dr. Peter Stalinsky in Florida. The third one has been declined for insufficient funds. The balance available was $12. The room went so quiet you could hear the hum of the ventilation fans. 500 people stopped breathing. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Stolen? Someone whispered at a nearby table. $12? Someone else muttered. I sat back in my chair, crossing my arms. There it was. The first brick had fallen. Gravity was taking over. Preston's face turned a color I had never seen on a human being before. It was a mix of gray and purple. He looked at the crowd, then at the manager, then at the microphone. He realized too late that everyone had heard every word. "This is ridiculous," Preston sputtered, trying to summon righteous indignation. "Do you know who I am? I will buy this hotel and fire you. This is a banking error, a glitch in the algorithm." The manager held up the payment terminal. It was glowing with a red light. "Sir, the contract states that 50% of the catering cost is due before the main course is served. That is $150,000. If we do not receive payment immediately, the kitchen will stop service. The staff will go home, and I will call the police regarding the stolen cards." $150,000. Preston looked around wildly. He looked at Jamal, who was staring at him with his mouth open, looking like a fish that had just been pulled onto a dock. He looked at his business partners at the VIP table, but they were all suddenly very interested in their phones or looking at the ceiling. The man in the black suit, the real creditor, was just watching, swirling his soda water, a predator enjoying the show. Preston did the only thing a coward can do. He pivoted. "Camilla, my love," he said, turning to my ex-wife. He put on his most charming smile, but it looked ghastly under the blue light. "Give Mr. Henry your card, the black one. You know how banks are with my international transfers. We will sort this out in the morning. Just cover the catering for now." He held out his hand, expecting her to save him, expecting her to be the safety net she had always been for him. Camilla sat frozen in her chair. Her tiara was slightly crooked. Her face was pale, stripped of all color. She looked at Preston's outstretched hand, then she looked at his face. "Preston?" she whispered. Her voice trembled, but the microphone picked it up perfectly. "What do you mean? Just give him the card, darling," Preston urged, his voice getting tighter. "We don't want the guests to wait for their lobster." Camilla stood up slowly. She looked like she was moving underwater. She clutched her sequined purse to her chest. I can't," she stammered. "What do you mean you can't?" Preston snapped, his patience fraying. "Just hand him the card." "I don't have any money, Preston," Camilla screamed. The sound tore through the room. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated panic. "What?" Preston stepped back, looking at her as if she were speaking a foreign language. "I gave it to you," she cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "This morning, in the hotel suite. You said you needed liquid capital to close the lithium deal before the market opened. You said if I didn't give you everything, the deal would fall through." Preston froze. He looked at the audience. He looked at the camera crew, who were zooming in on his face. "I wired you everything," Camilla sobbed, her voice breaking. "The money from the house refinance, the savings account, the alimony settlement. I even cashed out my IRA. You said you would triple it by tonight. You said the wedding would be paid for out of the profits." The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a truth so large it displaced all the air. Camilla turned to the manager, her hands shaking as she pointed at Preston. "He has the money. He has $600,000 of my money. Ask him." The manager turned his gaze to Preston. It wasn't a polite gaze anymore. It was the gaze of a man who realized he was dealing with a criminal. "Mr. Sterling," the manager asked, "is this true? Can you provide an alternative method of payment using these funds?" Preston opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his phone. He tapped the screen frantically, as if looking for an escape hatch, a magic button that would make the money appear. It is in escrow," Preston mumbled, his voice barely audible now. "It is locked in the blockchain. It takes time to liquefy." "Liar," the word came from the front row. It wasn't Camilla, it was Jamal. My son stood up. He knocked his chair over. He looked at Preston with a mixture of horror and betrayal that was painful to watch. You told me the liquidity pool was instant, Jamal shouted. You made me sign over the trust fund an hour ago because you said you needed to bundle it. You said you had the cash on hand. I took a sip of my water. The glass felt cool against my fingers. So, he had tried to take the trust fund too. I felt a grim satisfaction, knowing that the document Jamal had handed him was worthless. The money was safe, locked behind the clause I had added. Preston had stolen a piece of paper, nothing more. But he had taken everything else. Preston looked at Jamal. Then he looked at Camilla. Then he looked at the exit signs. Now, everyone, please, let's calm down, Preston said, raising his hands in a surrender gesture. There is a simple explanation. The volatility of the crypto market caused a temporary freeze. The money is there. It is just inaccessible for 24 hours. Inaccessible? Camilla shrieked. She lunged at him, grabbing the lapels of his white tuxedo. You told me you bought this resort. You told me you owned the building. Now they are asking you for a credit card? I was in negotiations to buy it, Preston lied, trying to peel her fingers off his jacket. It is a complex acquisition. Sir, the manager interrupted, stepping between them. He signaled to two large security guards standing by the door. I am going to have to ask you to step into my office, and we are going to call the local authorities to sort out these stolen credit cards. No, Preston yelled, shoving Camilla backward. She stumbled and fell into her chair, burying her face in her hands. I am not going anywhere, Preston shouted, his voice cracking. This is a conspiracy. You are all jealous of my success. He looked around the room, his eyes wild. He was looking for an ally. He looked at the VIP table. Help me, he screamed at the man in the black suit. Tell them about our partnership. Tell them the capital is coming. The man in the black suit didn't stand up. He didn't speak. He simply picked up his napkin, dabbed his mouth, and slowly shook his head. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone. He wasn't calling a banker. He was calling his team to cut his losses. Preston turned to the crowd. Jamal, fix this. Use your card. We will pay you back triple tomorrow. Jamal stood there, his pockets turned inside out, empty. I gave you my card yesterday, Preston, Jamal whispered. You said you needed to upgrade the honeymoon suite. The house of cards didn't just fall. It disintegrated. I sat there in the back, watching the wreckage. The lobster was never coming. The cake would never be cut. The orchestra had stopped playing. I looked at Tiffany. She was frantically deleting posts from her Instagram. She was erasing the evidence of her bragging, trying to scrub her association with the disaster unfolding in front of her. I stood up. The show was over. The payoff had arrived, and it was brutal. But there was one more act to play. The police were coming, but before they arrived, the truth needed one final witness. I walked toward the front of the room. The crowd parted for me. I wasn't the invisible man anymore. In a room full of bankrupt fools, the man with a bus pass and a clear conscience is the king. Preston saw me coming. His eyes locked onto mine. For the first time, he didn't look at me with arrogance. He looked at me with recognition. He knew that I knew. Bernard, he gasped, sweating. Bernard, tell them. Tell them I am good for it. You know business. You know how these things work. I stopped in front of the head table. I looked at Camilla, sobbing in her ruined dress. I looked at Jamal, broken and empty. And I looked at Preston, the architect of their destruction. I reached into my pocket. I didn't pull out a checkbook. I pulled out the police report. I placed it gently on the table, right next to the microphone. I don't know business, Preston, I said, my voice calm and steady, picked up by the hot mic for everyone to hear. I am just a simple electrician. But I know that when the lights go out, it is usually because someone didn't pay the bill. I turned to the manager. Officer, I said, pointing to the document, I think this might help you with your paperwork. His name isn't Preston Sterling, and he has a warrant in Florida that is about to expire. The payoff was complete, and it cost me absolutely nothing. The silence that followed my statement was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. The police report sat on the white tablecloth like a radioactive object. Preston stared at it, his eyes bulging, his chest heaving under the damp tuxedo shirt. He looked like a man who had been running a marathon for 10 years and had just hit a brick wall. But before Preston could stammer out another lie, before he could spin another tale about misunderstood geniuses and banking errors, a chair scraped loudly against the parquet floor. The sound echoed through the cavernous room, sharp and deliberate. At the VIP table, the man in the black suit stood up. He didn't rush. He didn't look angry. He buttoned his jacket with a slow, methodical grace that was far more terrifying than any shout could have been. He adjusted his tinted glasses, picked up his glass of soda water, and walked toward the stage. The crowd parted for him instinctively. There was an aura around him, a gravitational pull of authority that made the senators and the CEOs step back. He walked up the steps to the head table, his heavy footsteps thudding in rhythm with the beating of 500 anxious hearts. He stopped next to me. He looked down at the police report I had placed on the table. He nodded, a gesture of professional respect. "You missed a page, Bernard," he said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and projected effortlessly without a microphone. But the report is accurate as far as it goes. He reached into his own inner pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He tossed it onto the table next to my document. It landed with a heavy slap. Preston, or should I say Pete, flinched as if he had been physically struck. "Who is this?" Camilla cried out. Her voice was shrill, bordering on hysteria. She looked from me to the stranger, her eyes wide with confusion. "Is he a business partner? Is he the banker? Preston, tell them who he is." Preston couldn't speak. He was hyperventilating. He was shaking his head frantically at the stranger, pleading with his eyes. A silent beg for mercy. "Please don't. Please stop." The stranger ignored him. He turned to Camilla. He took off his glasses, revealing those cold, gray eyes that had dissected me at the bar earlier. "I am not a banker, ma'am," he said. "My name is Detective Miller. I am a private investigator licensed in the state of Florida, and I am currently on the payroll of Mrs. Sarah Stalinsky." Camilla blinked, tears dripping off her chin. Who? Who is Sarah Stalinsky?" The stranger smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who has finally cornered the prey. "She is the woman who has been married to this man for 15 years, he said, pointing a finger at Preston. "She is the mother of his 3 children in Tallahassee, and she is the woman whose life savings he stole 6 months ago, before he disappeared to come here and find a new mark." A collective gasp tore through the room. It was a physical sound, like all the oxygen being sucked out of the ballroom at once. "Married?" someone whispered. 3 children? Camilla grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. Her knees buckled, and she sank into her chair, her white dress billowing around her like a collapsing parachute. "No," she whispered. "That is impossible. We just got married. I signed the papers. The license is invalid," the stranger said, his voice cutting through her denial like a scalpel. "You can't marry a man who is already married. This wedding is a sham. The vows are void. And frankly, considering he used a fake name on the application, I doubt the paperwork made it past the county clerk's trash bin." He turned his gaze back to Preston. "Hello, Pete," he said softly. "Long time no see. You have been a hard man to track. You change names like most people change socks. Preston Sterling, Arthur Vane, Marcus Gold. You have quite the imagination." Preston found his voice. It was a high, strangled squeak. "This is slander," he screamed, backing away until he bumped into the DJ booth. "I don't know this man. He is an actor. Bernard hired him. This is a setup." The stranger laughed. It was a dry, humorless bark. "A setup?" he asked. He picked up the envelope he had thrown on the table and ripped it open. Photocs spilled out, dozens of them. "Here you are in Miami, selling non-existent condos to pensioners," the stranger narrated, tossing a photo to the crowd. "Here you are in Dallas, running a fake charity for veterans. And here you are last week, meeting with a loan shark in Chicago because your Ponzi scheme was running dry." He looked at the crowd, addressing the 500 guests who were now standing, phones recording, witnessing the demolition of a socialite's life. "That is what this is, folks," the stranger announced. "A classic Ponzi. He uses the money from the new wife to pay the debts of the old life. He promised you 300% returns on Liberty coin. There is no coin. There is no lithium mine. There is just a bank account in the Caymans that he uses to pay for his suits and his rental cars." Jamal stepped forward. My son looked like a ghost. His face was ash gray. He picked up one of the photos. It showed Preston, or Pete, wearing a fast food uniform, standing outside a burger joint. The timestamp was only 2 years ago. You were a fry cook? Jamal whispered. Preston snatched the photo away. I was doing research for a franchise investment. But Jamal wasn't listening. The reality was crashing down on him. The stock options, the VP title, the millions. It was all smoke. Where is the trust fund? Jamal asked, his voice trembling with rage. The paper I signed. Where is it? Preston's eyes darted around. It is safe. It is processed. It is gone, the stranger corrected. Or it would be, if your father hadn't been smart enough to lock it. But the rest? The money from the house? The alimony? He looked at Camilla. Mrs. King, I am sorry to tell you this, but he wired your $600,000 to an offshore sports betting site 3 hours ago. He was trying to double it on a soccer match in Brazil. Did he win? Bernard asked. I spoke for the first time since the stranger had stood up. The stranger looked at me and shook his head. He bet on the underdog, Bernard. He lost everything. Camilla let out a wail that didn't sound human. It was the sound of a wounded animal. She lunged across the table, knocking over the wedding cake. The massive, 5-tier confection crashed to the floor, exploding in a mess of fondant and cream. She clawed at Preston's face, screaming incoherent curses. You thief! You monster! My house! My life! Preston shoved her away. He pushed her hard, sending her crashing into the spilled cake. He didn't care about her anymore. The charade was over. The mask was off. He looked at the doors. The exit signs were glowing red in the dim light. Stay back, Preston yelled, reaching into his jacket. For a second, everyone thought he had a gun. People screamed and dove under tables, but he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a passport. He jumped off the stage. He landed awkwardly, twisting his ankle, but adrenaline kept him moving. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted toward the side exit, the one that led to the kitchen and the loading dock. Stop him! Jamal yelled, but he was too shocked to move. Preston knocked over a waiter carrying a tray of champagne. Glass shattered. He pushed past Aunt Martha, who swung her purse at him and missed. He was running for his life. He reached the double doors. He slammed his body against them, expecting them to burst open to freedom, but they didn't move. He pushed again. He threw his shoulder against the wood. Locked. He turned around, panic etched into every feature of his sweaty face. He ran toward the main entrance, but as he reached the center of the room, the main doors swung open. They didn't open for him. They opened for the 4 uniformed police officers who marched in, followed by the 2 large security guards I had seen earlier. Preston skidded to a halt. He was trapped. Behind him was the angry mob of guests. In front of him was the law. He looked left. He looked right. He looked at me. I was still standing by the head table, next to the ruined cake and his weeping false bride. I raised my water glass to him. Checkmate, Pete, I said softly. The officers moved in. Preston tried to dodge, but the security guard, a man the size of a vending machine, grabbed him by the back of his expensive, sweat-stained tuxedo. He lifted Preston off his feet and slammed him onto a table, sending silverware flying. I am a diplomat, Preston screamed, his face pressed against a plate of uneaten salad. I have immunity. I am a sovereign citizen. You are a con artist with a warrant, the officer said, snapping the handcuffs onto his wrists. And you have the right to remain silent, though I really hope you don't, because everything you say makes the case easier. The room erupted into chaos. Flashbulbs popped. People were shouting, crying, demanding answers. Tiffany was screaming at a police officer that she didn't know him, that she was a victim too. Jamal was sitting on the floor, staring at the ceiling, completely catatonic. And Camilla was sitting in the wreckage of her wedding cake, white frosting smeared on her face like clown makeup, sobbing into her hands. The stranger walked over to me. He put his glasses back on. My client in Florida will be pleased, he said. We won't get the money back, obviously. It is gone. But at least she gets to see him in orange. He looked at the scene of devastation. You know, Bernard, he said, most people would have intervened sooner. They would have tried to save them before the money was transferred. Why did you wait? I looked at my ex-wife. I looked at the son who had tried to declare me incompetent. Because, detective, I said, if I had stopped him yesterday, they would have hated me for destroying their dream. They would have called me jealous. They would have blamed me for their lost millions. They had to see the check bounce with their own eyes. I smoothed my suit jacket. Sometimes, the only way to fix a faulty circuit is to let it burn out completely. Then you can rewire it from scratch. The police dragged Preston out. He was weeping now, begging Camilla to call his lawyer, begging Jamal to post bail. But no one moved. No one spoke. The wedding was over. The marriage was a lie. The fortune was a myth. And I, the failure, the man of the past, was the only one standing tall in the ruins. The arrival of the police was not like in the movies. There were no sirens wailing in the distance, giving the criminal time to find a back exit or formulate a plan. It was sudden, overwhelming, and absolute. One moment, the ballroom was a chaotic sea of confused guests and a fleeing groom. The next, it was a tactical operation. 4 uniformed officers and 2 plainclothes detectives moved through the main doors with the kind of kinetic energy that sucks the air out of a room. They didn't run, but they moved with a heavy, synchronized purpose that made the floorboards vibrate. I stood by the head table, my hand resting near the ruined wedding cake, watching the demolition crew arrive. In my line of work, when a building is structurally unsound, you call in the experts to bring it down safely. These officers were the demolition experts, and Preston Sterling was the condemned building. Preston saw them coming. He was trapped against the locked service doors, his chest heaving, sweat soaking through the white tuxedo jacket that he had probably charged to a stolen credit card. For a split second, I saw him calculate his odds. He looked at the kitchen entrance, then at the wall of blue uniforms closing in. He looked like a rat, realizing the maze has no cheese, only traps. "Get on the ground," the lead officer shouted. His voice was a weapon, sharp and commanding, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Preston didn't get on the ground. He raised his hands, putting on that slick salesman smile one last time. It was a reflex, a muscle memory. He thought he could negotiate with gravity. "Officers," he stammered, his voice cracking. "There is a misunderstanding here. I am Preston Sterling. I am a venture capitalist. I can make a call. I know the mayor." The officer didn't care about the mayor. He closed the distance in 2 strides, grabbed Preston's arm, and spun him around. With a practiced motion, he kicked Preston's legs apart and slammed him face first against the wall. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny," the officer recited, the words dull and routine. "My arm! Watch the suit!" Preston shrieked, his dignity evaporating instantly. "This is Italian silk. Do you know how much this costs?" The metallic click of handcuffs ratcheting shut was the only answer he got. It was a final, mechanical sound. Click, click. The circuit was broken. The energy was cut. As they hauled him up, turning him to face the room he had tried to conquer, the reality finally hit Camilla. Up until that moment, my ex-wife had been in a state of shock, a statue of denial sitting in a pile of cake and broken glass. But seeing the man she had worshipped, the man she had left me for, in handcuffs, it shattered her. But she didn't cry out for him. She didn't scream his name in anguish or worry about his safety. She screamed for the only thing she truly loved. "My money!" She scrambled up from her chair, slipping on the frosting, her ruined dress tangling around her legs. She looked wild, her hair coming loose from its intricate style, mascara streaking down her face like war paint. She didn't run to Preston to hug him. She ran to him to claw his eyes out. "You bastard!" she shrieked, her voice tearing at her throat. $2 million! You have $2 million of mine!" She tried to lunge at him, but a female officer stepped in her path, holding her back gently but firmly. "Ma'am, step back," the officer said. "He has my house," Camilla screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Preston. "The deed, the equity. I gave him everything this morning. He said he was putting it in a trust. He said we were buying the resort." Preston, with his hands cuffed behind his back, looked at her. The charm was gone. The love was gone. All that was left was the sneer of a predator who had finished his meal. "It is gone, Camilla," Preston spat out. "It is in the Caymans. You wanted a high roller? You paid the entry fee." "You thief!" Camilla wailed, collapsing to her knees in the middle of the dance floor. "That was my retirement. That was my life. Bernard!" She looked around frantically, her eyes finding me in the crowd. For the first time in years, she looked at me not with contempt, but with desperate need. "Bernard, tell them. Tell them to get my money back. You know how to fix things. Fix this." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had mocked my pension, who had called my savings small time, who had thrown a bus pass at me in a parking lot. I felt a deep, heavy sadness, but no urge to move. You cannot fix a house that is burned to the ground. You can only sweep up the ash. I can't fix this, Camilla, I said softly, though I knew she couldn't hear me over her own screaming. You didn't break a circuit. You sold the copper wiring. But while Camilla was mourning her bank account, Jamal was mourning his ego. My son had been standing frozen near the podium, watching the arrest with a look of total incomprehension. To him, Preston wasn't just a stepfather. Preston was the validation of every lazy, greedy impulse Jamal had ever had. Preston was proof that you didn't need to work hard to be rich. If Preston was a fraud, then Jamal was a fool. And Jamal would rather die than admit he was a fool. "Stop!" Jamal shouted. He ran down the steps of the stage, placing himself between the police and Preston. He held his arms out, blocking their path. He looked ridiculous, a boy in a tuxedo trying to stop a freight train. "You are making a mistake," Jamal yelled at the officers. "This man is a billionaire. He owns Sterling Capital. He is about to launch a cryptocurrency that will change the world." "Jamal, shut up," Preston hissed, trying to pull away from the officers. "No!" Jamal continued, his voice rising in pitch. "I saw the charts. I saw the lithium mines on his laptop. This is a conspiracy. You are trying to sabotage him because he is disrupting the banking industry." The lead officer stopped. He looked at Jamal with a mixture of annoyance and pity. He was a big man, tired, likely working a double shift. He didn't have time for delusions. "Son, move out of the way," the officer said calmly. "I won't," Jamal screamed. He grabbed Preston's arm, trying to pull him away from the police. "Let him go. He has a meeting in Tokyo. He is my business partner." The officer's patience snapped. He didn't unholster a weapon. He didn't shout. He simply extended one arm and shoved Jamal. It wasn't a violent shove, but it was decisive. Jamal stumbled back, tripping over his own expensive shoes, and fell hard onto his backside. He landed right next to his mother. "Stay down," the officer barked, pointing a finger at Jamal's face. "Unless you want to join him. We have a warrant for Peter Stalinsky, and if you keep obstructing justice, we will add you to the booking sheet as an accomplice. Do you want to go to jail for aiding and abetting a known felon?" Jamal blinked, staring up at the officer. The word accomplice hung in the air. But I am the vice president," Jamal whispered, his voice trembling. "You are the vice president of nothing," the officer said harshly. "There is no company. There is no mine. There is just a laptop full of Photoshop and a list of victims. Now sit there and shut up before I cuff you too." Jamal looked at Preston. He looked for the confident billionaire who had promised him the world. Preston wouldn't meet his eyes. He was staring at the floor, muttering about bail money. Jamal looked at the guests. 500 people were staring at him. They weren't looking at him with envy anymore. They were looking at him with disgust. They were whispering. "That is the son," they said. "He was in on it. He gave the speech." The illusion cracked. I watched it happen. I watched the light go out of my son's eyes as the fantasy structure he had built his identity on collapsed under the weight of reality. He wasn't a tycoon. He was a dupe. He was a 35-year-old man sitting on the floor of a ballroom, defending a man who had stolen his mother's future. The police began to march Preston toward the exit. The crowd parted, holding up their phones, recording every second of the walk of shame. Flashbulbs popped like strobes. Preston tried to keep his head up, but the weight of the handcuffs dragged his shoulders down. As he passed me, he stopped for a fraction of a second. "Bernard," he whispered. "The water bed. It was a sure thing. Keep walking, pal," the officer said, shoving him forward. I watched them go. I watched the flashing blue lights of the cruisers outside reflect against the glass doors. In the center of the room, my family remained. Camilla was rocking back and forth, clutching a piece of the tablecloth, muttering numbers. 2 million. 2 million. Jamal was staring at his hands, as if he had blood on them. Tiffany, who had been hiding near the chocolate fountain, finally stepped forward. She looked at Jamal on the floor. She didn't offer him a hand. She didn't ask if he was okay. She took off her ring, the ring Jamal had bought on credit, and dropped it into his lap. "You idiot," she hissed. "You told me he was real. You told me I was going to be rich." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the parquet floor. leaving my son alone in the wreckage of his own making. I stood there for a moment longer. The air conditioner hummed back to life, blowing cold air over the sweating, shocked crowd. The smell of stale perfume and fear was overwhelming. I adjusted my cuffs. I checked my pocket to make sure my passport and my plane ticket were safe. I walked over to the table where Jamal sat. I stood over him. I cast a shadow over him, just as he had lived in my shadow for so years, resentful and blind. He looked up at me. His eyes were red, wet, and empty. "Dad," he whispered. I didn't know. I looked down at him. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the cold, hard clarity of a balance sheet that has finally been reconciled. "You didn't want to know, Jamal," I said. "That is the difference." I turned my back on them. There was nothing left to fix here. The power was out, the wiring was fried, and the structure was condemned. It was time for me to go back to Lisbon, where the lights were steady and the people were real. There is a specific kind of sleep that only comes to a man who has balanced his books. It is deep. It is dreamless. It is the sleep of a mechanic who knows every bolt is tightened and every wire is insulated. For the first time in months, I wasn't sleeping in a house that felt like a museum of my failures. I was sleeping in a hotel bed with crisp linens, paid for with money that was entirely my own, in a city where the truth had finally been spoken. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:14 in the morning when the phone rang. It wasn't a soft chime. In the dead silence of the luxury suite, it sounded like a fire alarm. I didn't jump. I didn't panic. I rolled over slowly, my joints cracking slightly in the cool air conditioning. I reached out a hand that has calluses from 40 years of pulling cable and fumbled for the device. The screen was bright, blindingly so in the darkness. The name flashing on the display was one I had considered blocking a dozen times. Camilla. I stared at it. The phone vibrated against the wood of the nightstand, a persistent, angry buzz. Part of me, the part that was still the young man who met her at a church picnic in 1970, wanted to ignore it. I wanted to turn it over and go back to that peaceful, paid-for sleep. But the engineer in me is trained to investigate alarms. You don't ignore a warning light just because you don't like what it's telling you. I swiped the green button. I didn't say hello. I just brought the phone to my ear and waited. For the first 10 seconds, there were no words, just sound. The sound of wind whipping against a microphone, the sound of distant sirens, and the sound of breathing so jagged and wet, it sounded like a lung puncture. Bernard? Her voice was a ghost of the voice that had screamed at me in the restaurant. It was small. It was broken. It was the voice of a child who has dropped an ice cream cone in the dirt. "Bernard, are you there? Please, God, tell me you are there." I sat up, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. I placed my feet on the carpet. I reached for the bottle of water on the nightstand. "I am here, Camilla," I said. My voice was gravel, rough from sleep, but steady. "Oh, thank God. Thank God. Bernard, you have to help me. You have to come get me." I took a sip of water. "Where are you?" I am on the curb, outside the resort. They kicked us out, Bernard. They physically kicked us out. After the police took Preston away, the manager told us we had 30 minutes to vacate the premises. 30 minutes! I couldn't even pack everything. I left my shoes. I left my makeup bag. She paused to sob, a loud, ugly sound that distorted the connection. And then they put a seal on the door. A red sticker, Bernard. They said the room was a crime scene because Preston had stored documents there. I have nowhere to go. I tried to use my card for a taxi, but it was declined. They froze everything. The bank froze everything because of the investigation. I listened. I looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. The lights were still twinkling, indifferent to the tragedy of Mrs. Camilla King Sterling. "And Jamal?" I asked. He is sitting on his suitcase. He won't speak. Bernard, it is bad. It is so bad. The police said Jamal is a person of interest. Because he signed those loan documents as a guarantor. Because he was listed as an officer of the company. They took his passport, Bernard. They took his passport right there in the lobby. She began to cry harder now, the panic rising in her throat. "They are going to arrest our son, Bernard. They said he is liable for the catering bill. They said he is liable for the yacht. He doesn't have that kind of money. He is going to prison. You can't let that happen. He is your blood. He is your only son." I closed my eyes. I remembered Jamal standing on the stage, calling Preston his real father. I remembered Jamal trying to bully me into signing over the trust fund. I remembered Jamal telling me I was mediocre. "He is an adult, Camilla," I said. "He wanted to be a businessman. This is business." "No, don't be cruel. Not now. This isn't the time for a lesson." She took a ragged breath. I could hear the wind howling on her end. It must have been 40 degrees out there. She was probably still wearing that ridiculous, ruined wedding dress. "Bernard, listen to me. I made a mistake, okay? I admit it. I was foolish. I got swept up. But I am still your wife. In the eyes of God, I am still your wife. That ceremony, it was fake. The man was a fraud. That means we are still us. We are still Bernard and Camilla." I gripped the phone tighter. The audacity was breathtaking. It was a structural failure of morality so complete, I almost admired it. "We are not us, Camilla," I said. "We haven't been us for a long time. But we have history. 40 years, Bernard. You can't just throw that away because of one bad year. I know you. I know your heart. You are a protector. You fix things. That is what you do. You fix things when they break. I am broken, Bernard. Your family is broken. Please. I know you have the money now. I heard what you said in the ballroom. $8 million. That is a lot of money. It is more than enough to fix this." She lowered her voice, trying to find that intimate frequency she used to use when she wanted me to buy her a new car or pay for a vacation we couldn't afford. "You can pay off the hotel. You can hire a lawyer for Jamal. You can get me a suite. We can sit down and talk. We can start over. I will sign whatever you want. I will go to Portugal with you. I always wanted to see Europe." I let her talk. I let the silence stretch out. I looked at the clock. It was now 2:20. She had been talking for 6 minutes. She was bargaining. She was offering me her presence as if it were a prize. She thought that I was still the man who sought her approval, the man who felt lucky just to be allowed in her orbit. She thought my dignity had a price tag, and that tag was $8 million. "Bernard, why aren't you saying anything? Say something, please. Tell me you are coming. Tell me you still love me. I know you do. A love like ours doesn't just die." She was right about one thing. Love doesn't just die. It is killed. It is beaten to death with insults. It is starved with neglect. It is stabbed with betrayal. And finally, it is buried under a mountain of greed. My love didn't die tonight, Camilla. It died the day you looked at my hands, the hands that built your life, and called them dirty. I took a deep breath. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The final weight was gone. "Camilla," I said. "Yes? Yes, darling? I want you to listen to me very carefully. I am listening. I am listening. You have a phone. That is good. You need to save the battery." "What?" "You are asking the wrong person for help, Camilla. I am not your husband. I am not your savior. And I am certainly not your bank. I am just a spectator. Bernard, don't—" "The person you need to call right now is not me," I continued, my voice as cold and final as a breaker snapping shut. "You need to look up the number for the Cook County Public Defender's Office." There was a stunned silence on the line. "What?" she whispered. "A public defender? But those are for poor people." "I know," I said. And then I did the kindest thing I could do. I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down. I just pressed the red button. The line went dead. The sobbing, the wind, the manipulation, it all vanished. I placed the phone back on the nightstand, face down. I sat there for a moment in the silence of the hotel room. I poured myself another glass of water and drank it slowly. I thought about Jamal sitting on his suitcase. I thought about Camilla shivering in the cold. I felt a pang of pity, yes. I am human. But pity is not the same as obligation. I had given them every chance. I had warned them. I had tried to be a father and a husband for decades. They had made their choice. They had chosen the fast lane, the easy money, the shiny facade. Now they were learning that when you build a house on sand, you don't get to call the carpenter when the tide comes in. I lay back down. I pulled the duvet up to my chin. The sheets were cool and soft. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I would fly back to Lisbon. I would buy fresh bread. I would sit by the river, and I would never, ever answer that phone again. I fell asleep within minutes. The morning sun streaming through the glass atrium of the hotel lobby was bright, unforgiving, and exactly what I needed. I had checked out of my suite 10 minutes early. My bill was settled in full. My luggage was packed with the military precision of a man who has lived out of a toolbox for half a century. I was wearing a comfortable travel sweater and reading glasses, looking every bit the retired grandfather I was supposed to be. I felt light. I felt unburdened. The toxicity of the previous night had been washed away by a hot shower and 8 hours of sleep. I rolled my suitcase toward the revolving doors, ready to catch the shuttle to O'Hare. I was already mentally back in Lisbon, tasting the salt air and the grilled fish. But as I rounded the large potted palm near the concierge desk, my path was blocked. It wasn't a physical barricade, but it might as well have been. Standing there, looking like survivors of a shipwreck, were Tiffany and Jamal. They looked nothing like the arrogant power couple who had sneered at my suit 24 hours ago. Jamal was wearing the same tuxedo trousers from the wedding, but his shirt was unbuttoned, stained with something dark that looked like red wine, and he wasn't wearing shoes. He was wearing hotel slippers. Tiffany, the Instagram model who wouldn't be caught dead without a filter, looked ragged. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing dark circles under her eyes, and she was wearing a frantic, desperate expression that I had seen before. It is the look of a client who realizes they cut the wrong wire and the sparks are about to fly. "Bernard!" Tiffany cried out. She didn't wait for me to stop. She threw herself at me. She grabbed my arm with both hands, her grip surprisingly strong. "Dad! Oh, thank God we caught you. Please don't leave. You can't leave." I stopped rolling my suitcase. I looked down at her hands, clutching my sweater. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my arm. "I have a flight to catch, Tiffany," I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice I used to tell a homeowner that their entire breaker box needed to be replaced. "No, you don't understand," she sobbed. The tears started instantly. They welled up in her eyes and spilled over, terrified and voluminous. "We are sorry, Dad. We are so sorry. We were stupid. We were blind. Preston, that monster, he brainwashed us. He made us believe things that weren't true." She looked at Jamal, who was standing a few feet back, staring at the floor, looking like a man awaiting execution. "Tell him, Jamal," Tiffany shrieked. "Tell your father how sorry we are." Jamal looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked at me, and I saw shame, yes, but I also saw the same weakness that had got him into this mess. He was still looking for someone to carry him. "I'm sorry, Dad," Jamal mumbled. "I really messed up." "You didn't just mess up, son," I said. "You destroyed your life. There is a difference." Tiffany stepped between us, taking control of the narrative again. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, trying to summon a pitiful, childlike demeanor. "We know, Dad. We know. But we can fix it. We are family, right? Family forgives. Family rebuilds. But we have a problem. A big problem." I waited. I knew the ask was coming. It always comes. "They kicked us out of the hotel," Tiffany said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And the police, they seized the apartment. They said it was bought with proceeds from fraud. We have nowhere to go, Dad. Literally nowhere. Camilla is at a shelter downtown. We slept in the lobby on a couch until security woke us up." I looked at my watch. "I have 30 minutes before the shuttle. What is your point?" Tiffany took a deep breath. She placed a hand on her stomach. It was a theatrical gesture, one I had seen in bad movies. "I wasn't going to tell you like this," she said, looking up at me through her lashes. "But I'm pregnant." I didn't blink. I didn't gasp. I looked at her stomach, which was as flat as a board. "Pregnant?" I repeated. "Yes," she nodded vigorously. 6 weeks. We found out just before the wedding. That is why we were so desperate, Dad. That is why Jamal believed Preston. We were trying to build a future for your grandchild, for the next generation of kings." She grabbed my hand again, trying to press it against her belly. "You are going to be a grandfather, Bernard, a grandpa. Don't you want your grandchild to have a home? Don't you want him to grow up in the house his grandfather built?" I pulled my hand away. The manipulation was so clumsy it was almost insulting. "So here is what we need," Tiffany rushed on, thinking she had hooked me. "We need you to buy back the house. The bank is going to auction it off. If you step in now, with your cash, with the money you made from the patent, you can save it. We can all live there. You, me, Jamal, the baby. We can be a real family again. You can have your room back. The basement workroom is still there." She smiled, a wavering, hopeful smile. Please, Dad, do it for the baby. I looked at Jamal. He was nodding, clinging to this life raft his wife had just inflated. Yeah, Dad, Jamal said, for the baby. I took a step back. I looked at the two of them. I looked at the marble floor. I looked at the chandelier above us. I shifted into engineer mode. I stripped away the emotion, the tears, the word grandfather, and I looked at the raw data. Tiffany, I started, you say you are pregnant. Yes. And you say you are 6 weeks along. Yes. Interesting, I said, because at the rehearsal dinner 2 nights ago, I watched you drink 4 glasses of champagne, and on the yacht, you were doing shots of tequila with the bridesmaids. Now, either you are the most irresponsible mother in history, or you are lying to an old man to get access to his wallet. Tiffany's face went pale. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you are telling the truth, I continued, my voice hardening. Let's assume there is a child. You want me to buy the house back? Yes, she whispered. Let's look at the numbers, I said. I raised my hand and began counting off on my fingers. The house was appraised at $700,000. Camilla pulled out $600,000 in a high-interest equity line. That money is gone, stolen. If I buy the house back, I am not buying an asset. I am buying a debt. I would have to pay off the bank's lien just to take title. I took a step closer to them. I am a businessman, Tiffany. I am an investor. Why would I spend $700,000 on a house that is now worth maybe $500,000 because of the market crash, just to inherit a $600,000 debt? That is a net loss of over $1 million. But it's your home, Tiffany argued. It has sentimental value. Sentimental value doesn't pay the electric bill, I snapped, and it certainly doesn't cover bad decisions. I looked at Jamal. You want a house? I asked him. Get a job. Rent an apartment. Start at the bottom, like I did. Like every man has to do when he falls. But we can't, Tiffany wailed, the fake sweetness vanishing, replaced by panic. We have bad credit. Jamal's score is ruined because of the inquiries. We have no cash for a deposit. Then go to a shelter, I said. A shelter? Tiffany gasped. Like, with homeless people? Yes, I said, with people who are facing reality, unlike you. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase. You are cruel, Tiffany screamed, dropping the act completely. You are a bitter, selfish old man. You have millions. You could fix this with a signature. You are hoarding it while your family suffers. I stopped. I turned back to them one last time. I am not hoarding it, I said. I am protecting it. I am protecting it from people who think that tears are a currency. I am an engineer, Tiffany. I calculate based on structural integrity and load-bearing limits. And right now, you two are a collapsed bridge. I am not going to drive my truck onto it just because you asked nicely. I looked at her stomach. And if there really is a baby, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low, God help that child. Because if he has parents who think lying and begging is a career path, he doesn't stand a chance. I turned around. The automatic doors hissed open. The cold Chicago air hit my face, and it felt like freedom. I didn't look back. I heard Tiffany screaming insults. I heard Jamal sobbing. But it was just noise. It was the sound of a machine that had broken down because the operators didn't read the manual. I walked to the curb. The shuttle bus was waiting. The driver, a man about my age, stepped out and took my bag. Heading home, sir? He asked. I looked at the gray sky, then closed my eyes and pictured the orange tiles of Lisbon. Yes, I said, I am heading home. And this time, I am not leaving a forwarding address. You are just a bitter old man, Jamal screamed, and his voice cracked with the strain of his own impotence. He stepped away from Tiffany and pointed a shaking finger at my chest. You are enjoying this, aren't you? You are enjoying seeing us beg. But who are you really, Dad? You are just a retired electrician. You live on a pension. You clip coupons. You drive a truck that is 10 years old. You act like you are some big shot who can save us, but we know the truth. You don't have the money to buy that house back, even if you wanted to. You were just bluffing to hurt us. The accusation hung in the cold morning air. The shuttle bus driver, who had been loading my suitcase, stopped and looked at us. He looked at Jamal's unbuttoned tuxedo shirt and hotel slippers. Then he looked at me in my travel sweater and glasses. He didn't say anything, but I could see the judgment in his eyes. He saw a respectful older gentleman being harassed by a junkie or a drunk. I could have walked away right then. I could have stepped onto the bus and let Jamal live with his delusion. It would have been the noble thing to do, but I am not a noble man today. I am a man who has been erased by his own family for decades. I am a man who was told he was small. I am a man who was told he was a failure because he didn't drive a Bentley. And sometimes, when you are constantly told you are nothing, you have to show the world exactly what something looks like. I signaled to the driver to wait one moment. I turned back to my son. "You think I am broke?" I asked softly. "You think my refusal is a matter of ability rather than choice?" Jamal laughed, a wet, hysterical sound. "Of course you are broke. Mom took 60%. You live in Portugal because it is cheap. You are a refugee of poverty, Dad. Stop pretending." I reached into the inside pocket of my coat. I didn't pull out a wallet. I pulled out a thin leather case. From it, I extracted a business card. It wasn't my card. It was a heavy cream-colored card with embossed black lettering. I held it out. Jamal didn't want to take it, but his curiosity was a reflex he couldn't control. He snatched it from my hand. "Read it," I said. "Read the name of the company." Jamal squinted at the card. "Deal and Schmidt Energy Solutions," he read. "Munich, Germany." "So what? You know a German guy. Congratulations." "Turn it over," I said. He flipped the card. On the back, handwritten in blue ink, was a series of numbers. "What is this?" Jamal asked. "A phone number." "It is a wire transfer confirmation code," I said, "and the date next to it is yesterday." I took a step closer to him, forcing him to look me in the eye. "You are right, Jamal. I am a retired electrician. But you forgot what kind of electrician I was. I didn't just screw in light bulbs. I designed systems. And 10 years ago, I patented a smart circuit interrupter that prevents catastrophic surges in industrial power grids. For a long time, nobody wanted it. It was too advanced, too expensive. I paused, letting the words sink in. But the world caught up. Green energy grids need smart protection. Deal and Schmidt have been courting me for 6 months. We have been negotiating the terms while I sat on my terrace in Lisbon. And yesterday, while you were giving a toast to a con artist and your mother was marrying a felon, I was on a video call with their board of directors. Tiffany had stopped crying. She was staring at me, her mouth slightly open. The gears in her head were turning, shifting from manipulation to calculation. "What does that mean?" she whispered. "It means I sold the patent rights," I said. "I sold the exclusivity for the North American and European markets." "For how much?" Jamal asked. His voice was barely a whisper. He looked at the card again, as if the numbers would appear there. I looked at the shuttle bus. The engine was idling, a deep rumble that felt like power. "The final closing price was $8 million, I said. The silence that followed was different from the silence in the ballroom. The ballroom silence was shock. This silence was death. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. "8?" Jamal repeated. "Million. Cash," I clarified. "Up front. No stock options, no crypto coins, no future promises. $8 million deposited into my account in Zurich yesterday afternoon. And here is the best part," I continued, allowing a small, cold smile to touch my lips. "The divorce was finalized 6 months ago. The asset division is closed. Your mother's lawyers were very thorough. They took the house. They took the cash on hand. But they didn't think to ask about intellectual property that hadn't been monetized yet." I leaned in close to Jamal. "It is all mine, son. Every single cent. It is post-divorce income. Camilla gets 0. You get 0. A sound came from behind them, a soft thud. We all turned. Camilla was standing there. She must have come out of the hotel revolving doors just as I started speaking. She was wearing a gray tracksuit that I recognized as part of the hotel's Lost and Found collection. She looked 10 years older than she had yesterday. Her face was gray. Her eyes were hollow. She had heard. She had heard the number. 8 million, she whispered. She looked at me. She looked at the man she had thrown away. She looked at the man she had traded for a lie. "Bernard," she said. Her voice was a mixture of prayer and horror. 8 million. And then her eyes rolled back in her head. She didn't crumble gracefully like in the movies. She dropped like a stone. She hit the hard marble floor of the hotel entryway with a sickening slap. Mom Jamal screamed. He and Tiffany rushed to her. They knelt beside her, patting her cheeks, trying to wake her up. "Mom, wake up!" Tiffany yelled. Then she looked up at me. Her eyes were wide with a new kind of panic, the panic of someone who realizes they just burned the only bridge that led to paradise. "Dad, help us!" Tiffany screamed. "She is having a heart attack. You have to pay for the ambulance. We don't have insurance." I looked at my ex-wife lying on the floor. I looked at the woman who had demanded a lifestyle she couldn't afford and who had paid the ultimate price for it. I looked at my son and his wife, who were now looking at me, not as a father, but as a walking ATM machine worth $8 million. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a profound sense of validation. The math had finally worked out. The ledger was balanced. I turned to the bus driver. "I am ready to go now," I said. "But sir," the driver said, pointing to the scene on the floor. "Don't you want to?" I put my hand on his shoulder. "That is not my family," I said. "That is a cautionary tale." I stepped onto the bus. The doors hissed shut, sealing me inside the warm, quiet cabin. I walked to a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away from the curb, I looked down one last time. I saw hotel security running out to help Camilla. I saw Jamal sitting on the floor, holding his head in his hands, rocking back and forth. I saw Tiffany running after the bus for a few steps, screaming something that I couldn't hear through the glass, before she gave up and collapsed on the sidewalk. I settled back into the seat. I took out my phone. I opened my banking app. I looked at the balance. It was a long string of numbers. It looked abstract. It looked like freedom. I closed the app. I didn't need to look at it. I knew it was real. I watched the city of Chicago slide past the window, the gray buildings, the cold wind, the memories of 40 years of hard labor and thankless sacrifice. "Goodbye," I whispered. The bus merged onto the highway, heading toward the airport, toward the ocean, toward a life where respect was the only currency that mattered. I was 74 years old. I was alone. And for the first time in my life, I was completely and utterly free. I sat in the window seat of the shuttle bus, but the engine didn't rev. The driver hesitated, his foot hovering over the brake, because a frantic pounding had started on the glass door. It was a desperate, rhythmic thudding that sounded like a bird flying into a window pane, over and over again, unable to understand the nature of the barrier. I looked down. It was Jamal. He had pulled himself away from his unconscious mother. He had stepped over his hysterical wife. He was running alongside the bus, his hands slapping the metal, his face pressed against the glass. His tuxedo shirt was torn. He had lost one of his hotel slippers, so he was hopping on one foot and one sock on the cold, dirty pavement of the airport terminal. "Open the door," he screamed. "Dad, please, open the door." The driver looked back at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes asked a silent question. Do we go, or do we wait? I could have nodded. I could have told him to drive. It would have been the easy way out. But I am a man who finishes the job. You don't leave a live wire exposed, even if you are walking away from the building. You cap it off. You make it safe. "Open it," I said to the driver. "Just for a minute." The air brakes hissed. The door folded open with a mechanical groan. Jamal didn't rush in. He collapsed onto the first step. He didn't have the strength to stand anymore. He crawled up the stairs on his hands and knees, dragging himself toward me like a pilgrim reaching a shrine. He smelled of sweat, stale champagne, and fear. He grabbed my hand. His palms were clammy. "Dad," he wept, his head bowing until his forehead touched my knee. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was stupid." I looked down at the top of his head. I saw the thinning hair that he tried to hide with expensive cuts. I saw the trembling of his shoulders. "I know you were sorry, Jamal," I said quietly. "I know you were hurting." He looked up, hope flooding his eyes. It was a desperate, hungry hope. He thought he had found the crack in the armor. He thought he had found the father who used to sign his permission slips and pay his parking tickets. "You forgive me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "You won't leave us? You heard what Tiffany said. We are homeless, Dad. We have nothing. You have $8 million. You can save us. I can help you manage it. I learned a lot from Preston. I know it was a scam, but the principles. I can learn. I can be your asset manager. I pulled my hand away from his grip. He was still trying to sell me something. Even at rock bottom, he was still trying to negotiate a position. He didn't want a father. He wanted an investor. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat. I kept a small supply of envelopes there. I am a man who likes to be prepared. Jamal saw the movement. His eyes widened. He tracked my hand as it moved from my pocket to the air. He saw the white paper envelope. I saw the calculation happen in real time behind his teary eyes. He thought it was a check. He thought it was cash. He thought it was a lifeline. Here, I said, holding the envelope out to him. Thank you, Dad, Jamal breathed. He snatched the envelope with a speed that was almost predatory. He fumbled with the flap, tearing the paper in his haste. Thank you. I knew you wouldn't abandon me. I knew you loved me. He pulled out the contents. His smile froze. Then it crumbled. Then it died. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a stack of bills. It was a single, printed page and a small rectangular ticket. Jamal stared at them. He flipped the paper over, looking for the money. He shook the envelope, hoping something else would fall out. Nothing did. What is this? He whispered. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, bringing my face close to his. Look at it, Jamal. Read it. He held up the ticket. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely focus. Greyhound, he read. One way. To Detroit? Yes, I said. The bus leaves in 2 hours from Terminal C. Detroit? He asked, his voice rising in panic. Why Detroit? I don't know anyone in Detroit. Exactly, I said. I pointed to the paper in his other hand. And that, I continued, is a list I compiled last night. It is a list of temp agencies in the Detroit metro area that specialize in unskilled labor. Warehouses, construction cleanup, assembly lines. They don't ask for a resume. They don't care who your father is. They don't care about your credit score. They only care if you show up on time and work until the whistle blows. Jamal looked at the paper as if it were infected. You want me to be a laborer? He gasped. But I am an executive. I am a vice president. You were a vice president of a hallucination, Jamal, I said sharply. In the real world, you are a 35-year-old man with no assets, no skills, and a criminal record pending for fraud. You are not an executive. You are a liability. I sat back in my seat. You said you wanted to be rich, Jamal. You stood on that stage and mocked me. You said I was mediocre because I worked with my hands. You said I was the past. I pointed to the ticket. Well, this is your future. If you are truly the genius you claim to be, if you truly have the drive to be a billionaire, then Detroit shouldn't scare you. Go there, get a job, rent a room, save your money, build something real. But I can't, he wailed. I can't work in a factory. I have soft hands. Then calluses will teach you what respect feels like, I said. He tried to hand the envelope back to me. He tried to push it into my chest. No, I don't want this. I want the money. You have $8 million. Give me $1 million, just $1 million. It is nothing to you. I caught his wrist. My grip was iron. It was the grip of a man who had bent conduit pipe for 4 decades. Jamal winced. It is everything to me, Jamal, because I earned it. And giving it to you wouldn't save you. It would kill you. If I gave you $1 million today, Preston or someone just like him would have it by tomorrow. You are a parasite, Jamal. You have spent your entire life attaching yourself to a host. First me, then your mother, then Preston. You drain them until they are dry, and then you look for the next vein. I shoved his hand back. I am removing the host. But I will starve, he screamed. Tiffany will leave me. If she leaves you because you are poor, then she never loved you, I said. And if you starve, it is because you refuse to eat the food you earned. I looked at the driver. Go, I said. The driver hit the button. The air brakes released with a loud hiss. Jamal realized it was over. He scrambled backward down the steps, terrified that the door would close on him. He landed on the pavement, clutching the envelope and the ticket to his chest, because it was the only thing he had left. Dad, he screamed one last time as the doors folded shut. Don't do this! I didn't look away. I watched him through the glass. I watched him standing there, one shoe on, one shoe off, holding a ticket to a hard life. I spoke to him through the window, even though he couldn't hear me. I am not doing this to you, son. I am doing this for you. The bus lurched forward. The engine roared. Jamal started to run alongside us for a few yards, but he was weak and we were fast. He fell behind. I watched him shrink in the distance. I saw him stop running. I saw him look at the ticket in his hand. He was alone. For the first time in his life, he was completely, terrifyingly alone. And that was the only place where a man could actually be born. I turned forward. The highway stretched out in front of us, a gray ribbon leading to the sky. I picked up my phone. I deleted his number. Then I deleted Camilla's, then Tiffany's. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was an email from my architect in Lisbon. He had sent the sketches for the new villa I was planning to build. It had a large garden, a library, and a guest house for friends who were real. I opened the file. The colors were bright. The lines were clean. It looked like peace. I am Bernard King. I am 74 years old. I lost a family that never existed, but I found a dignity that will never expire. And as the bus accelerated toward the departure terminal, I realized that the best investment I ever made wasn't the patent, and it wasn't the savings. It was the bus ticket I just gave my son. If he uses it, he might survive. If he throws it away, he will vanish. But either way, the circuit is closed. The job is done. I close my eyes and let the motion of the bus rock me into a quiet, satisfied rest. Next stop, Portugal. Next stop, my life. The flight back to Lisbon was the longest of my life, not because of the distance, but because of the sheer weight of what I was leaving behind. I slept for most of it, the kind of exhaustion that goes down to the bone. But when the wheels touched the tarmac in Portugal, when I stepped out of the airport and felt that specific, warm Atlantic breeze on my face, I felt the last shackles fall away. I took a taxi to my apartment in the Alfama district. The driver was an old man who didn't speak much English, but he smiled when he helped me with my bag. I tipped him 20 euros, not because I was showing off, but because I respected the work. He thanked me with a genuine warmth that my own family hadn't shown me in decades. I walked up the stone steps to my door. I put the key in the lock. It turned smoothly, no codes to remember, no biometrics, no banks threatening to foreclose, just a simple, mechanical lock protecting a space that was entirely mine. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and the sea. My books were exactly where I left them. My chair was waiting by the window. I put my suitcase down in the hallway and didn't even unpack. I walked straight to the terrace doors and threw them open. The sun was beginning to set over the Tagus River. The water was a sheet of hammered gold, reflecting the orange roofs of the city. I could hear the distant sound of a fado singer practicing in a cafe down the street, a mournful, beautiful sound that spoke of destiny and the sea. I went to the kitchen and opened a bottle of wine. It wasn't a $2,000 bottle of Chateau Margaux with a fake label. It was a €20 bottle of local red from the Alentejo region. I poured a glass and walked back out to the balcony. I took a sip. It tasted like earth and sun and truth. It was rich, complex, and unpretentious. I sat there for a long time, watching the light fade. For years, I had been terrified of this moment. I had been terrified of being an old man, sitting alone on a balcony. Camilla had always told me that without her, I would be a lonely, pathetic hermit. Jamal had told me that without grandchildren, my life would have no legacy. They were wrong. Loneliness is not sitting alone on a terrace in Lisbon with $8 million in the bank and a clear conscience. Loneliness is sitting at a dinner table with 3 people who are calculating how much you are worth when you die. Loneliness is sleeping next to a woman who is dreaming of a man with a faster car. Loneliness is raising a son who looks at you and sees an obstacle instead of a father. I wasn't lonely. I was solitary. And there is a world of difference. My phone pinged on the table. It wasn't a call from them. I had changed my number the moment I landed. It was an email from the private investigator, Frank. He was wrapping up the file. He thought I might want to know the final disposition of the assets, as he called them. I opened the email. I read it with the detached interest of an engineer reading a post-mortem report on a collapsed bridge. Camilla. My ex-wife was currently residing in a studio apartment in a government-subsidized housing complex on the south side of Chicago. The police had seized everything that wasn't protected by basic bankruptcy laws. Her jewelry was gone. Her furs were sold at auction. The money she had wired to Preston was untraceable, lost in the labyrinth of offshore accounts that the authorities were still trying to unravel. Frank wrote that she had applied for a job as a greeter at a department store, The same store where she used to spend thousands of dollars a month. The irony was geometric in its perfection. She was now opening doors for the kind of women she used to try to impress. I wondered if she thought about me when she stood there for 8 hours a day in sensible shoes. I wondered if she remembered the man who used to rub her feet after a long day. Probably not. She was likely too busy blaming the world for her misfortune, still convinced she was a queen in exile. Preston, or rather, Pete Stalinsky. The report said he was being held without bail. The federal prosecutor was throwing the book at him. Wire fraud, identity theft, grand larceny, and because he had crossed state lines, the charges were federal. He was looking at 20 years minimum. Frank included a mugshot. Pete wasn't smiling anymore. He looked small. Without the expensive suit, without the rented Bentley, without the lighting and the stage, he was just an aging grifter with fear in his eyes. He had spent his life selling illusions, and now he was going to spend the rest of it staring at concrete walls that were very, very real. And then there was Jamal. The report on Jamal was shorter. Tiffany had filed for divorce 3 days after the wedding disaster. She cited irreconcilable differences, which is lawyer speak for he ran out of money. She had moved back in with her parents in Wisconsin and was already posting pictures on social media with a new boyfriend, a car salesman this time. She moved fast. Parasites always do. Jamal didn't fight the divorce. He didn't have the money for a lawyer. Frank tracked him to a boarding house in Detroit. He had used the bus ticket. He was working the night shift at a logistics warehouse loading trucks. It was hard, back-breaking work. The kind of work he used to sneer at. The kind of work I did for 40 years to buy him his first car. Frank said Jamal was living in a small room with a shared bathroom. He had no car. He took the bus to work. I put the phone down. I sipped my wine. I felt a twinge of sadness for the boy who used to sit on my shoulders and reach for the moon. But I pushed it away. That boy was gone. The man in Detroit was a stranger. But maybe, just maybe, the warehouse would teach him what I couldn't. Maybe the weight of the boxes and the ache in his muscles would finally teach him the value of $1. Maybe, in the silence of that small room, he would finally find his own character. Or maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he would break. But that was his circuit to fix. I had installed the safety mechanisms. I had provided the tools. The maintenance was up to him. I looked out at the river again. The lights of the 25th of April bridge were twinkling in the distance. It looked like a string of pearls, far more beautiful than the fake diamonds Camilla had worn. I thought about the new villa I was going to build. I thought about the German engineers I was going to meet next week to discuss the European rollout of my patent. I thought about the cooking class I had signed up for. I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't living for someone else. I wasn't the provider. I wasn't the safety net. I wasn't the wallet. I was just Bernard, and Bernard was happy. I finished the wine. The sky was now a deep, velvet purple. I stood up and walked to the railing. I took a deep breath of the cool night air. I am not a vengeful man. I don't wish them harm. I just wish them the life they earned. And I wish myself the peace I paid for. The books are balanced, the lights are on, and the view from here is spectacular. We often spend our lives building castles for people who would happily sell the bricks the moment we turn our backs. I learned that loyalty isn't about blood, it's about character. My ex-wife and son chased the illusion of fast wealth and lost the only real treasure they had, a man who would have died for them. In the end, dignity is the most expensive currency. You can't buy it, you can't fake it, and once you lose it chasing fool's gold, you can never buy it back. Invest in yourself. It's the only asset that never depreciates. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to save your own sanity, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And if you want to hear more stories about justice being served cold, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. I have a lot more to tell you. Let me know in the comments. Would you have given Jamal the money, or did I do the right thing? I read every single comment. See you in the next video.